next couple of hours. We will do our best. I will do my best as I host you over the next couple of hours. My name is Charles Ross. I'm a principal at Economist Impact, and I spend lots of my time focusing on technology and innovation-related topics. So what we're talking about today is stuff that I really sort of care about and passionate about. And we've just had a great conversation next door talking about this, and so we can build on some of this as well here today. Before I get into it, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting here today, the Gadigal people, and pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. You're going to hear from me a lot in a minute, but first I'm going to hand over to Adam Makarucha, who is the Australia and New Zealand Client Engineering Senior Leader from IBM. You're in his capable hands for the next 5 minutes, and then I'll come back. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks for that, Charles. So yeah, as Charles said, great energy already. This is one of my favorite types of events. I love panels because I don't have to do any slides. So I'll be on the next panel, so I'm not going to get into too much stuff here because I don't want to give all away that material now. But what I hope is that energy continues and we can really get into, I think we're asking questions of the panel, so make sure you kind of query the panel, get the information you're after, because this is your opportunity to hear from your fellow colleagues and leaders in the data space, understand what they're doing well, what they're challenged at, and how you might actually use some of that knowledge to go forward and make changes and implement innovation within your organization. We've had an interesting 6 months. I think AI is the topic that everybody's talking about. Most vendors have like this 5 rule. You have to say AI 5 times. I think I'm at 3 at the moment. And you might be getting a bit of AI fatigue. You might be actually implementing a lot of things. But at IBM and with the team that I lead, the client engineering team, we're really focused on value out of that AI. It's not AI for the sake of it. It's not AI for marketing. It's AI because we can drive serious value for you and your organization. And the backbone of that value is data. And you'll hear a lot from our data leaders and within these organizations here today about how they're enabling that AI and innovation through well-governed and maintained data environments that have allowed them to get to this success. You'll hear about the challenges they deal with, as well as what's driving them to success. So once again, make sure you ask them questions, make sure you query them, and most of all, just enjoy yourselves. So thanks very much, and I'll pass back to Charles.
Excellent. Thank you, Adam. Looking forward to it. Before we get into it, just a few admin-related stuff. Thank you all for joining us here in the room. This is being live streamed as well, so thank you to everybody who is joining remotely here as well. A big thank you to IBM for sponsoring this event. This is the last in this series of events that we're doing. It's a global program of events, very similar audiences to this. We've had some across North America and in Europe as well, and I think this is a great place to sort of end up the year. But hopefully we're back again next year and we can build on the conversations we're going to be having here today. So as you can see from the big branding behind me, this is the Data Dividend series, and it's about scaling, accelerating value generation from artificial intelligence. And as Adam was saying earlier, super key, important period of time that we're going through at the moment, and to be having this discussion. I think not only are we seeing these real peaks in hype to some extent around things like generative AI, we're also going through a period of economic disruption where the world we're in at the moment is getting used to sort of slower levels of growth, higher interest rates, lagging consumer demand, profitability likely being hit. And so within this sort of challenging context, we also have this real opportunity around technology to solve some of those productivity challenges that we might have out there if we are able to understand the technology well enough, understand how it can be applied well enough. So that's one of the big takeaways I'm hoping you can walk out of here by the end of the afternoon, is to have a better understanding of the technology and the application of that technology, the opportunities, the challenges, the things you need to be looking out for as well in terms of those risks as well. So we've got some fabulous panels and speakers to hear from, and as Adam mentioned as well, I'm going to be doing my best to tap into all of you to contribute and ask questions. We have some interactive sessions as well, which we're going to rely on you to speak, and we've got some debates around that as well. So I'd love to get your views and your opinions there as well. So this is a really, really early shout out. If you have a question, think about it, and we'll get a microphone to you during those panel discussions. So there's also some audience feedback at the end. We'll point you in the direction of that, so please do sort of complete that as well. That helps us to get better at doing these types of events, so it works for you, so you're getting value from them as well. So let me get into our first session, and the first session is really to try and sort of set things up. We want to try and understand what are those things which differentiates the leaders at the moment from the laggards. What are the things that are keeping the leaders awake at night, that they're focusing on, where they're prioritizing their effort? What sort of strategies are they deploying to leverage some of those opportunities, address some of those challenges as well? And lastly, what is the future? What do they see the future is going to look like? Are we going to be experimenting for the next 12 months around these types of things? Or can we get value earlier than this? Or is it more than 12 months before we're actually genuinely getting real value from data and many of the technologies that we're going to be talking about here today? So let me get my fantastic speakers up here. Adam, if you wouldn't mind coming back up to the panel. I won't introduce you again. We also have Angela Kim, who is the Head of Insights, Reporting and Data Analytics and AI at AIA. Angela, if you could come up. She's also, with her other hat on, the Global Chief Education Officer for Women in AI. Thank you, Angela, for joining us today. And lastly, Ashwin Sinha, who is from Macquarie Bank and is the Executive Director and Chief Data Officer. Please do take a seat. Excellent. Thank you very much. And again, another early shout out. If you have any questions, do pop your hands up, and I will come to you during the discussion, particularly if you disagree with something anybody is saying here. I love a bit of fiery debate, if we can have a little bit of that as well. So I want to focus on, I guess with each of you, there's a lot going on at the moment, but what is top of mind? I mean, for you, what is top of mind? When you wake up this morning, what's top of mind of things that you need to sort of focus on? Well, I hope you're not thinking about work first thing, maybe the second thing when you wake up in the morning. What is that thing which is top of mind for you at the moment?
Thanks, Charles. Hi, everyone. It's good to be here. It changes every day, by the way. So, topics which are front of mind, like I think many of you, of course, the risk management and governance of data and AI is front of mind. With generative AI, there is a lot of myth and hype and confusion around it. So trying to get to the real practical guardrails and how you manage the risk and the application of it, that's front of mind every day. Second one is, of course, you look at aspects of data from privacy, protection, retention, all of that is front of mind, of course. And then the third one is the pace of change in this space is pretty rapid. So when you start thinking about deploying stuff in production, to your point earlier about are we going to be in experimentation phase for next few years, it's really thinking about, okay, what needs to happen to get this in production, and how do you maintain flexibility around it, because things are going to change. So how do you maintain flexibility around your architecture and design, so that you can get it into production, get some value out of it, and at the same time able to iterate it when things change.
Do you think that, I mean, I hate mentioning the pandemic in a post-pandemic world, but do you think that pace of change you talked about, is it as fast as what we were experiencing during the pandemic? Because there's a lot of innovation during that period of time because we just had to get stuff done. How does this compare to that in terms of how fast you're operating and moving?
Yeah, I mean, pandemic accelerated digitization for all organizations globally. So that definitely became a thing. Accepting remote, people working anywhere, that became a thing and a lot more real because we just had to accept it. But with rise of generative AI, which has been going around since 2017-18, but really with ChatGPT and its launch last year, I think people became far more aware. it's like, okay, anybody could play and understand, and it was quite easy for people to get. And also the way it evolved with all the different software vendors, with OpenAI, with Google, with Anthropic, it just means that it is far more accessible, and generally, in general population, as well as enterprises are far more aware about the applications. The applications are moving faster because there are millions of developers globally who are continuously contributing to the open source community. They are creating new apps. It's a bit like when iPhone came with App Store, there were a whole range of new apps coming. Now with generative AI, there are a whole range of applications which are coming day to day, and it's about, okay, how do you embrace it, and how do you make relevant use of it?
Yeah. And how do you filter those pitches of people trying to sell you apps?
Yeah.
I guess, right?
Yeah.
Angela, from your perspective, are you similar things you're top of mind when you're waking up in the morning?
Yes, Charles, as Ashwini mentioned, all these relevant topics are very important for everyone who's involved in data and technology and AI. And to add a bit more, it's very interesting how really all this technology, disruptive technology involvement and the speed and everything really, and generative AI, for example, really speed up, really enforced everyone to think about what is the future of work. How can we really enable all these employees who's in technology or business and also elsewhere? How can you make your organization truly data and technology and AI-driven organization so that you can make the most out of data? Now it's not asset, serving data as a product. And what's the best way to really grow the employees as well? And what does that mean to the senior leaders? And is it only the people and learning, the culture, HR leaders' responsibility, or is it broader than that? So all these different understanding the learning ecosystem of your employees, because you need to really reskill your employees. It's imperative. You can't just sit down and rely on your employees will be self-learn and improve, or you want to bring in new employees, because you need to really the balancing the right mixture of keeping your SMEs and grow them so that they can be reskilled appropriately and creating new jobs. At the same time, how to bring the new advanced technologies to externally, and so that you can really create a truly collaborative working environment so that you can grow together. That is, there's no magic formula. It's hard, and no one actually struck the right solution yet. But we need to be willing to learn and grow together, and it's everyone's responsibility, not just technology team, right? And understanding that. And I was in Dubai last month, and presenting at the GITEX conference, and about 80% of the conversation around data and technology and AI was focusing on around the future work, of course, but as Ashwini mentioned about how to reskilling, how to bring the team's data governance and privacy protective way, and also the sustainability. How can technology can be more aware and conscious about really driving ESG really friendly way, so that we can start the journey together before it's too late.
That's a very long top of your mind in the morning. I hope you have a couple of cups of coffee.
Yes.
What about from yourself?
I kind of said it in the intro. For me and our team, it's value. Yeah. It's all about how we drive value with our customers and make sure that what we're implementing is going to be valuable for the organization. We're actually not looking for 10, 15% productivity gains. We're after 200%, 300% productivity gains, where we're looking at where we can automate whole processes. And so top of mind for me is we're seeing those gains in and with generative AI. So how do we take that from a pilot or a POC into production and enterprise? And so for me, it's value, but value driven by enterprise generative AI.
So 200% productivity gains, lots of automation. That spells lots of job losses to me. Is that fair?
I don't think so. I think I've got a couple of examples. I was working with a device manufacturer, a medical device manufacturer over in New Zealand, and they have the task of, they make medical devices and therapeutic goods. regulatory requirements is that they kind of do a regular literature review. This literature review takes 3 engineers 20% of their time a month to do, because literature research is hard, reading the publications is hard, summarising them is hard, and it takes a long time. They don't like it, and most of the time they're just throwing the papers away and saying this isn't relevant. What they want to do is get to the good papers so they can spend their time reading those. That's where the true value is. And so we implemented a generative AI solution using our tools, and we were able to get that down to one person for 1 day a month. So that was taking the work from 100 days or over a year down to less than 15. And that was the type of productivity gain. And I can tell you, the engineers are not crying sad about that. This is the type of work they don't want to do.
Yeah, I think we could probably all think of areas in our job that we don't like to do. I mean, I think in our business at The Economist, we do a lot of research, and there's some of the teams spend a lot of time on literature reviews, like weeks and weeks on literature reviews. And we could absolutely speed up that period of time, but still have that human element in there, because you need to understand it and review it, et cetera, et cetera. But all that heavy lifting, all those desktop searches, that can be done by something else.
Exactly.
Okay, well that is positive. It's just going to take away the stuff we don't want to do. Yeah. So that's sort of top of mind. Just thinking about sort of strategies and the sorts of things you're working on at the moment. Andrew, you talked a bit about, and you can't talk about technology without thinking about the people element and the retraining and the skilling element, which you mentioned already. With your other hat on, you focus a lot on women in AI. Does this look any different in terms of the work you're doing around that? Is there more opportunity? Is there specific challenges? What are you doing in terms of enabling women to succeed more within this area?
Thanks for asking the question, Charles, because that's really the topic, very close to my heart. So I started working with women in AI about 5 years ago, because I always consider myself, I'm very lucky, because I'm an immigrant. And since the day I arrived in Australia, I was very lucky to have meet great teachers, professors, and managers, and colleagues. And they really tried to open the door for me. And to me, it was like, gift given free. I don't think I've done work extra hard to deserve it, but it just happened. So when when my son started high school, I realized, okay, how can I return the favor given to me? And I used to volunteer for soup kitchen and local soccer club, but I decided, okay, maybe it's better to use my talent and focus one area and really help and enable and return the favor given to me. So I started working with the First Nations community, women community, and refugee community. And also Ashwini's Macquarie group is kindly supporting a lot of AI camp for lower socioeconomic school area girls. And when you really see the value that created from the partnering with the school, the students who didn't have opportunity before, and the smart students it took only 3 workshops, and they learn how to code, they learn about responsible AI and visual analytics, and they started dreaming about their future, and they all enrolled 3 years later in engineering department. And the high school mentioned that it's first ever 10 girls from that school did a really high ATAR. One of the girls came first in the HSC that year. And they all majored in engineering, not medicine and not law. I'm not saying they are not less important discipline, but it's really possible that really it takes only small community, and also IBM has been very kindly sponsoring and supporting a lot of women in AI event and forum as well. So all this combined effort really generates value, and to me, it is really important because really AI serves the value and importance of diversity and equity and inclusion. It is not like optional, it's mandatory. If you want to create really better future using AI, then you need to consider all these elements and from the beginning, really baked in the beginning, from the design by really diversity and equity and inclusion. And through the experience, I learn more rather than actually sharing. So it is really really worthwhile experience. And I met amazing, great people, not just in Australia but globally as well. So it is really great opportunity.
really great initiatives. I can see the huge sort of value in building up that grassroots knowledge and understanding here. But I do wonder, and Ashwin, I want to get your sort of view on this. If we're trying to build an organization, one of these leaders I talked about earlier, that is going to be the best ones at thriving in this world we're living in, is it more important to have this sort of this database from a people perspective, a culture there, or is the tech more important to get that right? It's what's the most important thing you think in terms of being an organization which is really well placed to leverage value from data?
Yeah, it's a mix of all of those things. Tech is the easy part usually. I think first is, of course, the talent pool which you have got externally as well as internally. Growing and nurturing that is quite important. And what has changed there is it's less about the technical skill set now. It's more about the learning mindset, right? I mean, your ability to learn and continuously forget what you knew and then learn something new is quite important. I mean, the way sort of I used to work as an engineer is probably less relevant now compared to how I should be operating, and that would apply to many different people across different job functions which they do. So that learning mindset becomes super critical, and thinking about the talent in that way is quite important. A culture which is kind of, you are safe to experiment, try new things, and iterate very rapidly. That's quite important, because a lot of application in artificial intelligence, you're not going to get certain outcomes all the time. So it's not quite a deterministic outcome in every single situation. And usually the outcomes improve as you iterate and work through things. So that's quite a different type of mindset and culture, which you need to be quite open to. The guardrails are quite important, the risk management around this space, because if you have got loose control around it, it could go in many different directions, from a privacy, biases, explainability, provenance of data, hallucinations. So you have to consider that in a much more holistic way on how you are applying it within your organization. So that is quite important in terms of making it happen. Adam said it earlier, which is fundamental. Data is the fuel for AI. So you need to get the access to data quite easily resolved. And that applies in terms of many different ways, depending on the type of data you're looking at. But that is quite important to consider. So those would be the key bits for me in terms of how you set it up properly. Yeah.
If you're thinking about the person, sort of the top tech person within an organization, the CIO, CTO, CDO, whoever that is, you talked about a lot of the things that they probably need to be aware of. They need to sort of understand the technology. They need to sort of understand what the guardrails are to keep the organization safe, and lots of other things. The counterclaim is that I spoke to the CIO of DBS Bank. I was based in Singapore for a long time, so I know a lot of people in Singapore. So I spoke to him, and he said something a little bit different, that it's actually a real disadvantage for a senior tech leader to have any sort of specific deep expertise on any of this, because it means that they have this sort of inherent bias towards doing that, rather than actually having a business-wide approach or business-wide thinking on how can this flow into what we're trying to achieve as an organization. Would you agree with this? We should be more generalists needed at the top of the organization?
Yeah, I think of it a bit differently. I do not disagree with that, but I think of it a bit differently. It's like it's not necessary that you need to understand every single method which you're going to apply to get to an outcome. But if you understand the method to some level, you know the possibilities which are there. So that is quite important. If you think about it, with a lot of new stuff which is in artificial intelligence space, it could almost seem mythical to some people. It could seem magical. And then it's like, you could do this and you could do that and you could do that. And the same applies from a risk management perspective as well. But I'm talking quite specifically to AI and data risk. But if you understand that topic to some level of detail, you can guide the organization around the risk as well as the opportunities. So that is quite important. If you are a generalist, it becomes really hard, and you are very reliant on your teams to come up with those possibilities and opportunities. which may be okay in some organizations because you may have a whole range of amazing people in their topics. And they may be able to collaborate effectively and bring it together, but sometimes it does not operate that way. So if you understand to some level of detail, that is good, and you do not need to prescribe a method for an outcome. I think that is the thing which I agree with in your statement, that if you become, I think in every single case it is generative AI, that's a bit problematic because not everything can be solved with generative AI. Or you are saying everything has to be, an if then else statement, that's problematic as well. So I think you need to just get the balance right there.
Yeah, we've seen that in the past, and I think hopefully we've learnt our lesson. Some organizations, there was a company in Australia that wanted to build AI into their culture, and to do that they said, well, AI by default should be the solution to every problem that we have. And so there's an issue comes up, right, let's use AI to solve this. Clearly that is not the way to do it because it's not fit for purpose for all of these sorts of issues. So hopefully we've moved away from that. First pause to see if we've got any questions in the audience. Do put your hand up if you have a question. I think we have a microphone in the back, please. Any questions from anybody? Yes, one here in the front row. Excellent. Thank you. You're making her work getting a microphone. She makes her way around. Thank you. If you could just let everybody know who you are and then answer your question, please.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. My name is Kieran Hagan, and full disclosure, I am from IBM.
Okay.
But I am keen to ask the panel. It used to be in a service-related industry, the customer experience was everything. And I've seen a lot of examples where AI has been applied to everything like virtual assistants and avatars and really generating a whole new experience. But I haven't seen so much of that adoption locally. What does good AI look like for a customer experience? What's your impressions and how that could be delivered locally?
Good to see you, Kieran, after many, many years. I would say I used to work very closely with IBM in my previous life, so I know Kieran from that time. So what would I say? I think it is fundamentally about removing friction for customer. We all have amazing digital experiences in our favorite apps, whatever they may be. And I think for all types of organizations, there is an opportunity to use AI in terms of truly eliminating that friction from the client experience. It could be as simple as you are looking for your transactions on your banking app, or you are looking at categorization of your expenses. Really basic example. You are looking at how you would. I think Adam gave an example earlier about virtual assistants, but how you're looking at you want to do a certain banking activity, and you're like, rather than calling call center, can I just search it and get some real clear instructions which I can apply myself and avoid calling or avoid wasting time on phone call or whatever. I think those are very clear experiences. The other thing which is more data related than AI related is connecting the experiences when you interact with an organization across different channels. So that is whether you're interacting through their digital channel, their call or contact center channel, their sales and distribution teams, or through their just public-facing website. If your interactions across all of those are connected, you just get a far better experience and you're far more satisfied, because by the time you call the contact center, they really understand, you were trying to do this on website or your app and that did not work for you, and how they can help you with the specific problem which you are facing.
I feel like to some extent what is going to be defined as good AI is going to change over time, and change from a generation perspective as well. I mean, I think younger people than us coming through, they're going to have a different perception of artificial intelligence. So I guess as an example, if probably me, I might feel a little bit uncomfortable if an organization was pretending to be a human response to some of my queries, but actually was AI. So wasn't giving that sort of disclosure that actually I'm talking to AI to solve this problem. But I think as generations come through, they're not going to have that sort of preconceived idea of what a customer or service representative is meant to do or look like or sound like. Do you have a view?
I can add, small note to Kieran's question. Highly agree with Ashwini's point. Why it's important, and Personally, I've delivered chatbot, Rasa chatbot, twice in my previous workplace. And to me, customer experience is really most important, right? Because I believe customers really deserve, they're buying our products, right? And they are buying our service. So no matter what we do, we really need to be really obsessed with the customer satisfaction and customer experience because they've earned it, right? And all the technology, experimentation, everything is very important, and doing all the advanced analytics and data science and AI. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't really help customer experience, we are not academic organization, right? We need to focus around how it can really help. How can we remove the bottleneck, and how can we help customers to do things more convenient way? Almost like that has to be first agenda. We need to really drive data and technology and AI team. So it took quite long because sometimes the reason why I'm picking the Rasa example is the Lemonade, the insurance company, right? So they started with insurance company, but they became technology company because they're collecting data and they try to really advance and innovate, right? So to me, there are a lot of opportunities, but sometimes organizations, especially big organizations, a bit more conservative around experimentation. And that is because sometimes you don't have the right people in the organization, or you are too risk averse, right? So, again, balancing the right risk, which is safe enough, but we want to really willing to really push the boundaries because we know that it won't take overnight, but it will eventually take the journey and deliver really meaningful, tangible outcome for our customers and for the eventual business, because that comes automatically by default. If you really please customers, then business will generate because people are not fool, right? So to me, customer experience is very important, and there are some really organizations doing great things because nowadays a lot of tools available, platforms available. There are so many great partners willing to work with you. So again, as an organization, you need to have leaders who are willing to really find who are the right technology partner to work for this particular project, and how can you grow and learn together. That is really important, and that's really test and learn, right? But thanks for sharing. Good question, Kieran. Really appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions in the audience? Yes, excellent. Just in the front here. Might be a moment. Coming to you. Thank you.
Saman from Pearson. I had a question regarding the fact that mindset or growth mindset is becoming a bit more important when you want to hire someone because the knowledge, the hard skills are not as important. But I feel like our hiring system is more dependent on hard skills rather than soft skills. How can we move from those types of finding the right talent to the new ways of finding the right talent, basically? Yeah, thanks.
It's a good question. We could probably do half a day on that type of thing. I think we've actually been doing some research on this at Economist Impact and sort of seeing a trend away from this sort of requirement of needing an undergraduate degree or a master's degree for a role, and really focusing it on sort of a skills-based thing, which doesn't fully solve the problem that you have because it is still skills-based, but it does take away that sort of requirement that you have to need to go away and spend sort of 4 years getting a degree for something of which you only use a little bit, and companies generally don't care about that. They care about what are the skills that you have to be able to do this. I think there's a piece of data. I think Google, only something like 5% of their jobs globally have a requirement for an undergraduate degree. 95% of them, you don't need an undergraduate degree to get a job at Google. You just need certain skills. Now, granted, you probably need to do an undergraduate degree, get lots of those skills, but still, it's not a requirement. So the education system might change to meet that. Anyone else have a view on this one?
I was part of this. I'm part of this client engineering team at IBM, and we spun this team up 2 years ago, and we hired 600 people globally in about 6 months. And that was with a team that wasn't established. So we had an interviewer pool of maybe like 30 people. And I was one of those 30, and I got the opportunity to hire a bunch of data scientists globally. And the thing that we look for, we have growth-minded is one of our values, and so we are always looking for those people who are growth-minded. And so what we realized is that the CV and the kind of cover letter doesn't ever really get you that. It's really a human approach that helps you identify whether somebody's growth-minded. And so we identified the first question we should always ask somebody is, what was the project you're most proud of, and tell me why it was valuable. And just that simple question and that explanation, I quickly identified those people that were growth-minded, why they did it, what they were proud about, and what the value it was driving, versus those who couldn't really answer it. And so we identified that really there's a combination. There's this analytics-driven approach where you can say these skills meet the requirement, but for growth-minded, it's still really very human.
Excellent. Useful advice, anybody who is recruiting or interviewing for roles. Anybody else? Any other questions? We have about 7 minutes left on this panel. I still have some stuff to cover, but if you do have a question, do jump in. Yes, please. Just in the front here. I love that everybody close to the stage is asking questions today.
I assume that you all read someone else's articles or someone else is influencer to you. So I want to know who is influencer to you in this field.
Yeah, do you hear that one? So who is influencing you within this field at the moment? So when you wake up in the morning, you got your list of priorities and stuff like that. Who's the second person you think of aside from your partner? Did you want to have Angela? What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go. So I have a few. I'll give the IBM answer, which is our VP of Research, Dario Gil. And the reason I do is he's been around this space for a long time, and he has a really different perspective. And so for me, I think from not just from an IBM perspective, I think he has really good ideas about what AI is about and how it should be implemented. And the other place I look is actually GitHub trending. And this is the trending repositories within the open source. And this tells me what the open source community is doing. They tell me what projects are skyrocketing to the top. And this gives you insight into the kind of things that the engineers are interested in. And it's really important in my role to find out what engineers are looking at and interested in and starring in GitHub. So they're kind of the main ones for me.
My go-to usually is a guy called Benedict Evans, who some of you may have heard, but he writes a lot about sort of the future of technology and AI and the implications of it for business and industry. Has a great podcast as well. I don't have a vested interest here, but do listen to it if you can.
For me, I struggle to follow a single person, so I really struggle with that. So I read and listen to a lot of different variety of stuff. The sources are GitHub. I look at that quite regularly in terms of different repositories and which are the repositories which are quite popular. I'll try that out, some of those myself, so I would do that. Then there is a summary of thread which I get through certain publications with respect to all the leading research papers which come in this space. So I'll pick some of those and read through those. And then there is another one which comes around all the activity globally and in Silicon Valley in this space. So I'll go and read those and then follow on and research that, which basically gives you a pretty comprehensive view at an engineering level as well as application of it. I mean, there is pretty good content on Medium, but then you need to have the filter right. That okay, who are the people you're going to read, and then they do describe some of it in good level of detail. But the best thing is trying it yourself, right? I do feel that on this topic there are a whole range of people who talk about it at a very informed level, but they are not as informed. Yeah.
This panel is about sort of leaders and laggards, and maybe Adam, I'd just like to take a moment as we've got a few minutes left. You get to spend a lot of time with lots of different companies. What's been surprised you the most, or been the most interesting in terms of the leaders or the laggards that you've seen out there, to sort of highlight maybe some of the learnings for the room here?
Yeah, I think the thing that surprised me the most is particularly in Australia, we don't see this as globally, but the hesitation to take the risk. Everybody's in a pilot phase with Gen AI, whereas companies globally are in production. They're doing things. So I think Australia has this, and the companies within Australia have this culture of hesitation and risk aversion. I think that surprises me a little bit, and I'd like us to become the leaders and maybe, throw off those shackles. But because of that, the thing that I think we see successful companies do is kind of all of the stuff that goes around AI is way more mature than other companies. It's the governance around data, the data management, the data security policies. It's how we monitor those things at scale. There was a bank we're working with that for high-risk AI use cases, they have a third-party vendor that they get to approve that use case. So they're going to the nth that they're trying to actually make sure that anything they produce is safe and secure. Now that might slow people down, but in this case, they've got these policies in place. And because they've got the policies in place, I think we can start to move a little bit faster.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that doesn't sound too negative, I guess. I mean, it's not a sprint. Sprint for some, I guess. But, this new way of doing things, this technology is going to be around for a long period of time. So we need to sort of get things in place as guardrails.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right. And Ashwin said it, data, the foundation is the key. I think we're in a good place in the country.
Yeah. That's positive. One last quick, a question. Ask question one more time.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Great chat. Just want to ask a question of Adam, just something he raised about Australian companies being sort of resistant to adoption of AI. You didn't really speak to what the drivers were for that, so I was just wondering if you had any sort of thoughts around that.
Yeah, well, I probably was a bit generalist. What we're seeing it is in the top end of town. So we work across the gamut of startups and big enterprise and government. And it's the risk aversion. Lots of pilot programs. Everybody's doing a pilot program. They have a team doing AI, and they're all very excited about it. But moving from that, they're all experiments. And nobody's thinking about this thing here I know that's going to production, and I'm actually implementing the production steps now. I'm thinking about what the database is. I'm thinking about who's going to manage that. I'm thinking about role-based access control, all of that stuff that makes it enterprise. They're not thinking about. They're thinking about, can I complete the experiment? As the experiment prove the value? And I think that just is like any AI project. I imagine you guys have done it too. AI projects get stuck because we do science. We've got to start doing engineering. And I think that's the point. We've got to think of this as an engineering aspect. It's a product development. Let's treat it that way. Then you get to production. If you stay in science, you just don't get there.
Yeah, we did a survey of business leaders across Asia, and somewhere just over 50% of companies were in this position where they recognise something like generative AI would have some value to their business, and they'd either started and then pause as they sort of realise, actually, we don't really understand it that well, or where's the value, or what's the risk, where all these sort of things, or they just haven't started yet because they're sort of waiting and seeing, or they don't have the people or the money to do that. Sort of this paused phase as they sort of look and experiment a little bit. We are out of time, unfortunately. You're going to have plenty of opportunity to ask questions for the next sessions. I think it's been a really interesting start to the afternoon. To hear a little bit about the sorts of things top of mind for you, and there is obviously clearly a big list there and some challenges around prioritising all of that. But I think we're in an exciting sort of time, and I mean we might be a little bit slower, I guess, in Australia in terms of adopting, but I think we'll probably find out as we get further down the line that actually there's a lot we don't know about this, so it is good to have those guardrails in place and sort of take it slow and steady. And so there's some reputational issues here if we get it wrong for firms in Australia. So good start. Thank you very much for all of your time. Please join me in thanking my panelists for today. Thank you very much. And I am now going to hand over to my colleague Elizabeth Mackey. She works with me at Economist Impact within our new globalization practice, and she's going to be moderating the next session with you. So thank you, Liz. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. Hi, everyone. Great to see you all here. My name is Elizabeth Mackey. I'm a senior manager in the new globalization practice at Economist Impact. I'm going to be guiding you through the next few sessions, and really do encourage you to raise your hand, ask questions, get involved in the discussion. There will be an interactive discussion following this panel discussion, so we're going to be really relying on you to want to chat with us about it. So the second session that we'll be hosting here today, and I'll just ask the panelists, because I think they're spread around the room, to maybe try and make their way up onto stage. So this will be diving into the way that generative AI is transforming the way that business is managing and interacting with both their workforce but also consumers. Let me just step back and let you through. So really there's a huge reliance here on data and analytics leaders to know how to shape and work with the enterprise to make sure that growth mindset is still in place. We have a really great range of panelists here today. We have Aurélie Jacquet, Chair of AI Committee at the Standards Australia. We have Dan German, the Chief Decision Scientist at the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, and Rafaela Salza, the Chief Data and Analytics Officer for APAC at Coca-Cola Euro-Pacific Partners. Thank you for joining me. So just to say, please do raise your hand at any point, interject, ask a question. It's great if we can get into a discussion with the panelists, particularly if there's something being raised that takes your interest. As you've seen, we have roaming microphones. Okay, so just to, I guess, set the scene for everyone here so that we sort of understand what this session is really aiming to dive into. I'm going to ask all of the panelists, and maybe I'll start with you and move sort of down the line. How do data and analytics leaders design meaningful human work using generative AI? Thanks, Aurélie.
Yeah, pleasure. I think today we've learned, there was lots of talk of going fast, going slow. I think it's understanding what pieces you need to go slow so you can actually go faster. We heard lots about proof of concept, right? Maybe one tip, because there's time, one tip. We've heard proof of concept. The problem is to scale. Planning for your data, for your model, but also actually scaling it through the risk management piece and maintaining that model. That's going to be absolutely essential, and that's what differentiates AI from other technology. So I'll leave it to that one for the first step.
Rafaela?
Thank you. If we are talking specifically about generative AI instead of just AI as a broader thing, for me as a data and analytics leader, the most important thing is to separate the signal from the noise. I think we have all been in the last 10 years had a massive overflow of too much information, always on. And at Coca-Cola Euro-Pacific Partners, our goal for generative AI at this point is to help our workforce to cut through the noise and really get the insights and the value out of the data in a very quick and efficient way.
Dan?
Well, I think the way you framed the question is very interesting. You said, how do we set up teams to you think about generative AI for meaningful human work? And I'd probably frame the question differently, or think about a different premise, which is what are the problems that we're trying to solve, and if so, how can generative AI help? And so I think I recall at the start, the start of the sort of AI revolution, whenever we define that as starting, a lot of the time I was on panels like this and people would say, well, I think AI is, a sledgehammer to crack a nut, or the other thing is like it's a hammer and everything that you see is a nail. And I found that a little bit misleading too. In fact, I think over the course of the last 6-7 years or so, we've thought about the problems that we have to solve, and if they involve prediction, or if they involve creating more automated ways of doing things in a way that's helpful to the customers that we're trying to serve, and AI can help with that, we use it. And if it isn't, we don't. So I think the answer around setting up is probably really getting the balance right between having people who understand the craft, people who understand the problem space and the people that you're trying to serve, and making sure that those are lockstep in terms of the purpose that they're trying to drive.
Yeah, you make a really interesting point there, and I think because we do hear a lot of commentary around AI, generative AI, and I mean, I think this probably touches on a point from the previous session that there's potentially a lot of people talking about it that don't really know what they're talking about. And so I guess when we're thinking about this and the way that the potential uses, the use cases are being formed within business and organizations, and how we apply them across different sectors and for different purposes across the organization. And Aurélie, I'll direct this question to you. how do you think organizations can build the right culture internally, and this is around generative AI, and ensure that the whole organization is sort of on board with that movement?
So I'd say the first part is, as you said, what you said in the data world is actually true again in the policy world. There's a lot of noise about AI, and it's either what you hear is this constant, it can kill you, it can do the worst thing, but on the same time, it can be the best. So we need to actually, at the organizational level, just leave that very binary approach to AI and actually start thinking it's a tool. It's a tool that if I use, I need to control. Like any other tool, I've got I've got a risk management process, and start thinking about those processes and what it means, where the challenge with AI. So you need to understand the AI technology because it will affect some of the risk management, but start thinking how it's going to impact your risk management. And that's how you understand the risk better. That's how it goes through the product development faster. And that's where you understand which AI use case are bad and which one are good.
Do you think on an organizational level that it's possible to sort of provide the right information so that I guess people aren't so worried about what generative AI might be doing to replace their jobs? Is there more communication that can be happening around that?
So for us, the work I do, part of standards and certification of AI system, we're working with 50 countries for the last 6 years on literally what are the guidelines that needs to be followed across each discipline to look at the data. What's the uplift for the data? What's the uplift for the model? What's the uplift for the organizational process? So we're writing those guidelines that are recognized that have been developed by 50 countries to actually help the engineering team, but also the compliance team and also the board. So, and you see also a bit of a shift for some country. In New Zealand, actually, they started within the court system to actually give guidance to the lawyers, but to also the different actors as to what it meant to use it responsibly. So, yes, I think those guidelines that are being developed and that will come, the certification will come in place next year, will really help understand what's the uplifts that each of the professionals need to consider when they're actually developing, designing, risk managing AI through the whole product lifeline.
Raphael?
I'd like to just contribute on the point of people are afraid to lose jobs, and that seems to be a common theme. For me, there will always be a place for humans, and it's how you use generative AI to delegate some of that more repetitive work. It's still, all the results will still need critical thinking, they need analytical thinking, they need emotional intelligence, which all generative AI cannot provide. And so it's about changing the way we work or changing the ways of working, instead of seeing it as a threat to say, my job will be gone. Some jobs, in my opinion, will not be there. So for example, a Power BI dashboard developer, that's, I think, a job which is a little bit at risk when Microsoft is now working on a product where somebody basically can describe in human language on what information they want to see, and then the co-pilot will basically come up with the dashboard. However, a Power BI developer has many other skills, like they are not just dashboard. They know the underlying data structures, they know storytelling, data storytelling, they know how to find the insights. So all these skills are still very relevant, because it's, for me, also about the question you ask and the prompt. And that is way more important than that's a very important human skill, I should say, to really ask the right question, and ask a question also which matters, which a lot of people ask. It's easy to ask a question, but it's not very easy to ask a question which actually has commercial value. Adam talked a lot about value. Of course, all companies are investing in AI to create value for the company and create commercial value. It's also about the action coming out of that, coming out of the question. Like, what is the action us as a company can take from a particular insight or from a particular piece of information? That's what matters most to the company, and not even the, that information in itself.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds as if you're sort of saying that it's about enhancing and about ensuring that the workforce is evolving with the way that things are changing. I do want to pivot slightly just for a moment to talk about sort of the more consumer-focused stuff, because in a lot of the work that we do at Economist Impact, we do a lot of research around different trends that are impacting the world in the next 5 to 10 years, and hyper-personalisation is one of the things that comes up over and over again. And so Dan, if I can direct this to you initially, and then Rafaela, please feel free to jump in afterwards. How can organisations use data and generative AI not only to internally improve workforce processes, but also to benefit consumers?
I think it's a huge opportunity, and I'd echo a lot of the sentiments talked about previously. I think the challenge here is not so much in dispelling fear so much as it is in educating the art of the possible and using that for the purpose that you're driven by. So taking the Commonwealth Bank as an example, around about, like I say, 6 years ago perhaps, our first major implementation of AI was this thing called the Customer Engagement Engine. And what we do with that is try to, no matter how a customer chooses to bank with us, whether that's online, in the branch, on the call centre, create a single experience for them that tries to anticipate their need and have a next best conversation with them that we think is the most relevant. So that was our flagship personalisation. And over the last 5-6 years, that's become ever more sophisticated. It now uses more than 1,000 AI models. With generative AI, we've already been thinking about the way that we have those conversations to be more engaging with customers. I think back in May, we had our first production use of this in the CommBank app, which was a test to think about constructing the language for different segments and just thinking about how the same message positioned in different ways might resonate differently. And what we found was, there was a range of responses there. In fact, the human experts still continue to perform much better than the generative AI that we used there. But what was important was we had a very good framework for measuring that. We knew what kind of ground truth was. We also had a very strong compliance lens over it. So how do you make sure that whatever you're doing there, meets the same standards as you would ordinarily do anyway? And so some of the ways that we're thinking about that now is, okay, if we have instances where the human experts are doing incredibly well, they're a precious resource, and we can only do that in so many places. Can we uplift those things that we can't get to through generative AI in a safe and scalable way so that more of our customers get a better experience in lots of those other types of things that we don't have the time resource to get to in the way that we would like to? And these are some of the ways in which I think generative AI can really help kind of lift the bar holistically. So I think we're all kind of well practiced in thinking about how to use the best of data, AI, analytics to do the very best that you can in particular segments, those things that are most important to you or your business or your customers. What's harder is doing that. It's very hard to do that in one place, never mind in lots and lots of different places. So we tend to have to kind of prioritize. And I think where generative AI will help is just kind of raising the tide in those customer experiences in other areas too.
I mean, just before we move on to Rafaela's answer, how do you prioritize?
Well, I think the same way that we always have. So what is the thing that we're what's most important to us? And for us, that's customer experience and NPS. So everything, and that really helps, by the way, in terms of, I think a lot of the things that I've heard in the prior session, this one too, is kind of, it's complex to do this because you need lots of different people involved. You need to have a risk lens. You need to, think about the digital designers, the engineers, the data scientists, the data people, the front line. And so it really helps if they've all got a common purpose and a common prioritization. So just thinking about, what is most important to your organization is a simple but true way in which we kind of think about things primarily. And then it's what can we do pragmatically and safely that will have the most impact. So Customer Engagement Engine was a great place for us to start with this because we already had infrastructure in place that meant we knew we've got a very controlled environment that allows us to speak to lots of customers in a kind of safe and controlled way. We have a measurement framework for it. We have established risk management practices. And so there's a very easy benchmark there to think about how do we maintain that same level of service in a safe way. So it's a combination of kind of value, practicality, and purpose, but purpose always driving it because that's the thing that's really going to help you get, all these things are difficult. The thing that will really help people go the extra mile, get it over the line, is if they feel passionate about getting to the outcome. And it also unites people of different skill sets, I think.
Yeah, getting everyone on the same page. Rafaela, what are your thoughts?
So I would like to first differentiate between a consumer and a customer for CCEP. So CCEP is not the Coca-Cola company, so we don't own the formula, the magic formula. And so we are very much, we sell the product, we manufacture, distribute and work with our customers, customer being a Woolworths, a Coles, a chicken shop, a Hilton, for example. And then obviously they sell on to consumers. And we obviously look at every other fast-moving consumer goods company at consumer trends. And there's a lot of internal processes we follow by improving the insights we get, for example, from Nielsen. But specifically, if you're talking about consumer improvements, it is all about preference. So the Coca-Cola company, or we as a Coca-Cola system, we sell in Australia about 300 different products, which most people don't know. A lot of people think about when it comes to Coca-Cola Euro-Pacific partners, there's obviously Coca-Cola, but there's 300 different products in our portfolio and many different brands like, for example, Sprite, Fanta, Mount Franklin water, there's sparkling water, there's still water, there's all that. And of course, there is now a trend to healthier products. And what we are working on is, especially with retailers, to segment the market into where our consumer, for example, health-conscious consumers, where they sit. And then we will focus products with no sugar or sparkling water with flavor, with more healthier choices into basically those clusters. Another example of a customer customer advantage we deliver with AI is with, for example, Woolworths and Coles, where we are optimizing our promotions. So when you walk into a Woolworths, you will know that our products are very often on sale, but when they come on sale, it's not a coincidence. And so we basically optimize the way we run our promotions, and it's all about pricing, which is obviously more a commercial benefit, but it's a commercial benefit for our customer, being in this case Woolworths or Coles, and obviously a commercial benefit for us as well. Coolers, Coca-Cola, we have 190,000 of equipment just in Australia. So every time you walk into a chicken shop and there is a Coca-Cola fridge there, it's actually our fridge. You cannot imagine the maintenance of those fridges. It's an absolute nightmare, extremely costly. Again, another way of generating shareholder value is to bring the costs down. So we are using AI to proactively predict when a certain fridge will have a certain problem. And so we proactively fix the fridge. So then our customer, being a chicken shop, will not basically have the fridge go down and can't sell. Obviously, nobody will drink our products cold to basically have then a loss of sales, or we have then obviously a loss of sales as well. But also we are trying to decrease the cost, the maintenance cost overall.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess we've talked about some of the advantages of using data and analytics and combined with generative AI. And we can't brush over the fact that there are risks involved as well, including with hyper-personalization. And for this sort of next question, I know that, Aurelie, you've been recently speaking at the UN, and so I might ask you to speak from the international perspective, and Dan, maybe from sort of the organisational perspective. How can we develop the right structures, such as frameworks and guardrails that we've been sort of already discussing today, to ensure that we have responsible use of AI?
So the last 2 months have been a very interesting months in the world of AI governance. UK, the EU AI Act, also in the US, Singapore, China. So it's imploding literally in this world. The effort we focus with the UN and that we do at the OECD and also at ISO is really to actually limit, again, that noise and to understand the common pieces that are repeating. While there's an awful lot of noise that can be very confusing for organizations, there's some common pieces that comes strongly in place. And I'll just give you an example. Recording. Recording of the system, because to make sure, how do we make sure that you stay in control of the AI system? You'll need to provide evidence, nothing new, but how do you do that within the AI system? The recording piece will be front of mind. again, the risk management piece, you'll see in pretty much most of the legislation, they're looking at either risk management, or some are looking at the certification piece, some are already doing certification. So despite the noise, there's some very clear signals that companies and organizations and CEOs should pay very much attention to. The work that we've been doing is to actually, as I say, look at an end-to-end perspective, because you can't just look at the data, and that's back to that proof of concept challenge. If you just look at the data, do the work on the data separately, do the work on the AI, and there's not a common piece linking those two, then it's really hard to scale. And from a regulatory piece, what we've done is we look at what you need to do to the data, to the model, to the governance, to actually, that will help implement each piece of, that will support the legislative initiative. So there's lots of work that's been done on that. And the key focus internationally at the moment is measurements and metrics. So they understand the risk management piece, but now what's really key is understanding how we're going to measure and what's going to be the methodology to measure that effectively the system is trustworthy and verify that the process has been done at the impact and risk management. So that's the key topics internationally.
Yeah, I mean, imagine much of that applies at an organizational level, Dan.
It does, of course, but perhaps to build then up, there's a great answer on the sort of macro. Let's think about it from a specific lens, and let's use banking, which I think is a good place to look for this, because if you distill down AI and what it is, largely we're talking about mathematical predictions. Banks have been doing mathematical predictions for decades through modeling. And so we already have pretty good risk governance frameworks that are well established in place for sort of managing predictions. And those things look at things like the input data, the techniques that you've used, who's validated it, what happens to the population over time, what's your in-life management, with your risk tolerance, is this a system where if it goes wrong, it doesn't make much of a difference, versus is this a system that goes wrong and has a dramatic impact? So don't overcomplicate things, just think about standard risk management approaches, everything that you think should have a control and have a good framework for kind of where your level of risk is. If we bring it up to date with generative AI, largely a lot of those things still apply. I think one of the things that confuses people is because generative AI, and particularly I think ChatGPT, was such an explosion in the public consciousness, because suddenly it's kind of conversing in what seems like language, and it seems magical, and it's an incredibly impressive thing when you see it for the first time. Underpinning that are models, again, albeit massive ones. Still, broadly speaking, the same kind of things apply. So the same kind of framework in terms of thinking about management can apply. The complications with AI that need specific guardrails are things like explainability or the propagation of bias, because these things are kind of harder or let's say more involved these days. I mean, it's a lot of work has gone on in this over the last 5 years, but certainly more involved than a simple sort of 1+1 model, that's for sure. But there's a lot of established work out there. And then in generative AI, really I think where we need to focus in terms of risk management is having a very good sense of what the generative AI we're using can do and what is the accuracy. I think this is where the real frontier is right now in terms of measuring the accuracy of the outputs. It's difficult. Depending on the use case, how do you quantify accuracy? That can be an incredibly nuanced question. If you have a sort of a very strict, let's say, legal document where there's only one right answer, and the answer gets generated through generative AI, and you say yes or no, that's an easy thing to measure the accuracy for. If it's a little more subjective, and a lot of the time it can be, you can ask two independent experts, was that the right answer? And you can get two different responses. So I think in terms of thinking about how do you effectively set up structures or guardrails for this kind of thing, to get the fundamentals right, and they're well established, and then think for generative AI specifically, what are the ways in which you're going to use this, and how do you get the risk appetite right for that particular use case?
Yeah, I mean, we've all, I think, all seen that debacle around the specific law example of ChatGPT gone wrong. We have a question here in the front. If we have a roaming mic. And just as before, please, when asking a question, please introduce yourself and let us know where you're from.
Hi, Natalia from Pearson. So as skills like critical thinking get more important to deal with generative AI and distinguish what is a hallucination, what is not, what is bias, what is not, how do you find and build these skills in your workforces?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is, in terms of even in the question, so hallucination, we're trying to move away from the term hallucination because I think it kind of it implies lucidity the rest of the time and kind of contributes to this sort of anthropomorphization of what is effectively a set of models. And so that really leads on to sort of some of my answer to the question, which is no matter how we think about the AI experts who need very advanced skills and need to stay up to date with the research, actually the reason why generative AI is so transformative is because it is no longer the preserve of those people in isolation. It can be applied in multiple different areas, and actually the things that are kind of nuanced about whether it is a good or not thing to use are generally that expertise is going to lie with the person who runs the current way of doing things that is looking at using this to help it. So I think there's no easy answer, but one of the most fundamental things we did as a bank, a long time ago, 7-8 years ago again, was as we thought about developing AI systems, we very consciously made sure that we set up teams where, yes, we had real AI expertise, but we also populated those teams with a very consciously, a cross-section of people from across the organization and across experiences and skill sets. And we really did do that. The person who my first hire when I joined the bank a long time ago now, started her career in the bank as a part-time teller in a branch in Brisbane. It's an incredible insight into what it was like to serve customers in a bank branch. And so, we had a team at the time who were like writing a load of predictive models and saying, hey, it'd be great to do this. And they said, you have any idea what that's going to do to the queue on a lunchtime if you make them do it? And so the single best thing that you can do, because we're all competing for the same sorts of talent, is really get the culture right and bring everybody on the journey. This is the discriminator, I think, between people who get this right and people who are still sort of thinking, this is really hard. It's because they're only looking at the data science elements, I think.
Any final questions? We have one in the back, sorry.
Thanks all, great conversation. My name's Sam Adelaju. I'm the Chief Experience Officer at Unloan, one of CommBank's ventures. Dan, I have a question for you. You can just do it on email later. I could, but I'll put you under the gun here.
Cheeky way of getting to the front of the queue.
So you talked a little bit about CEE, Customer Engagement Engine, and you talked about the way that Gen AI has a role to play there. Do you think for other businesses, or when you look at what CBA has been doing to date, do you think you shelve what you've done and sort of start again with Gen AI at the sort of driving forefront, or do you think there's sort of a complementary role for those two to play together?
It very much depends on the use case, right? So I think one of the things I've been really impressed with, I was out in the West Coast of the US recently, and we work with a company called H2O, and we partnered with them for a long time, and so very quickly they effectively have a large number of the world's very best data scientists, they're called Kaggle Grandmasters, working for them. And their product therefore allows us to do two things. One, they've kind of systematized the best of the best of the best into a very easy user interface, which allows us to democratize high-level skill. But they also allow us to work directly with those incredibly cutting-edge teams. And one of the things that they did recently was actually that they threw out the code base for a particular thing that they've been working on for a considerable amount of time and rewrote it very, very quickly. And it's a very courageous thing to do. And I think in our instance as a bank, I think actually some of the foundations that we've been building over time have had eyes on the horizon about what is coming next. We actually had to use generative AI internally to do one of my speeches to a town hall about 3 years ago. It wasn't very good, and we didn't know exactly when it would become a thing, but we've always thought strategically about what comes next. But you should always be thinking about, at this moment right now, with the conditions that I have, what is the best way for me to quickly get to the outcome that I want with my customers, and think strategically. Sometimes that will mean removing things that you've relied on to get you to that point. But in the specific instance that you described, no, I think those two things sit together very well, and actually it's a natural evolution.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but please hold on to the question. We do have another panel discussion to come. I just want to thank our panellists for their contributions today. It's been excellent to discuss this with you. There will be time to network again, so pick their brains about anything that we haven't been able to cover in this session. But thank you very much, Aurélie, Rafaela, and Dan.
Thank you.
So I'm staying with you, and this next part of the day is designed to be very interactive, so I'm hoping that you're all still feeling like raising those hands and having a discussion. So we've designed this session to be a bit of a debate. I'm going to give you a statement, and I'm going to ask you to have a bit of a think about it, and then I'm going to sort of poll you and get an idea of where people stand on that statement, if they agree or disagree with it. And then we'll poll you again at the end to see if anyone's minds have changed and anyone's had some really persuasive powers in the room. So the statement is, this House believes the risks of generative AI content and its disinformation are not properly addressed. So just sit on that for a moment, and I'll allow you to sort of think it through, and then we'll have another 10 seconds and I'll ask for a raise of hands. Okay. So can I get a raise of hands to see who in the room agrees with that statement? Okay. Let's see how many people raise their hands twice. And just a raise of hands if you would disagree with that statement. Great. Enough to have a debate. Okay. Is there anyone in the room that would like to kick us off in terms of why you agree or disagree with the statement? I'll start picking on people if someone doesn't volunteer. Kieran, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Do you need a mic?
Yeah, we've got one coming just now.
Hello. Kieran Hagen, IBM. And I decided to disagree with the statement, and from the perspective of I know what's coming. And this fundamental issue here around, if we talk about it, trust or responsible generative AI, is actually something that is very aggressively being pursued. And I think a lot of our panelists talked about some of the metrics that can be applied to that. If I remember, our friend from the Commonwealth Bank talking about if you address this sometimes as a mathematical or a modelling challenge, that can actually be measured, and rather than just being subjective, you can actually get empirical measures, which also leads to standards. Mm-hmm. So the bigger question here is, when you talk about risk, how do you measure risk, and how does it meet a standard? And I know that is technically possible.
And I think that was one of the key takeaways from that last session, is that risk management should be top of mind for everyone. Does anyone want to disagree, jump in, agree? Yes, over here.
Hi, it's Jun from DXC. So I think observing the news article online at the moment, and I think the new technology coming out with the generative AI for imaging, voiceover, and also movies as well, right? So you can get celebrities using the face to do some inappropriate videos. You can hear Donald Trump speaking in different language, pretending to speak a speech. And you can see the top news article, they actually got pictures to send out some message, but they actually not true reflection the actual event. So I think empirical analysis with detection are good, but in the generation of the generative AI is more than just pure numbers, text. So I can hear from the room to see that how we actually counter the misinformations and the risk posed by the new forms of media that actually not traditionally we can analyze by numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure, thank you, Adam.
I think it really comes down to answer that question, data. I mean, the data of the model that we train on, it's inherent in the bias. The model learns from that data. So if there's bias in the data, if there's problems in the data, that gets fed into the model, and then any generation is going to be a consequence of that. So I think there should be a demand for for any generative AI that we see what data is used to train that model. I think as consumers and users and organizations, we should be asking the vendors that create these models to tell us what was used for the data and how they've mitigated these risks in the data, because that's where it all comes from.
Great point. Rafaela?
I just want to comment on the risks of generative AI content going back to whatever supplier or vendor. So at CCP, we have actually disabled now all open source generative AI programs and everything. And this is obviously to protect our proprietary information. So the biggest risk is there that somebody in good faith asks a question or uploads some information into these models, and then that information basically leaks and could have a high impact on a reputational impact, for example. And however, as most people would probably appreciate and wouldn't, copy and paste our corporate strategy on any of these, but there's a lot more harmless information going on there. And one of our biggest risks is cybersecurity. And so what can happen with something which might be genuinely really harmless, but it might give a potential hacker an insight into our company or someone's name or a business process or whatever, which they can then use to basically create a very sophisticated and personal cyber attack. And that's where I see it is a massive risk.
I mean, I think you've raised a really good point there. I mean, what are some of the risks that other organisations are seeing from this? Does anyone have any examples they can provide and potential ways of mitigating them? Over here, in the front.
Thank you. I'm Samar from Scope New South Wales. It's a disability services organization. So the reason why I agree with this statement is, how when we started a company, we are being trained on how to keep our organization safe from attacks like phishing. I think there should be a similar training program, because not everyone in your organization would be from a data field. I think there should be at least awareness about these things, and that's why I think that there's a risk still if we implement in something into the organization without involving everyone, or at least propagating that information to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that the workforce aren't all digital natives, and how important cybersecurity training is. Exactly like Rafaela said, sometimes they're doing it in good faith. It's a simple mistake. Really good point. Any other examples that anyone would like to share? Yep, it's just down the front here. Thank you. Thanks, Bhavya.
Someone from Pearson. So I disagree with the sentence, and the reason for it is I'm thinking that we are looking at generative AI as the final solution, but I would think of it as as a junior person who's making the first draft, and at least one person should look at it afterwards. So if you look at it that way, it's making the work of like 100 people in 10 seconds. So that is, to me, not disinformation. It's just even like whatever person might make a lot of mistakes in one essay. So I would say it's not disinformation. It just needs a better supervision, or at least one step of supervision. But we need to look at the generative AI output the way it is, not the way we want it to be as a final answer to everything.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the key points, I guess, in all of the sessions, is it's about human augmentation of what we receive from generative AI. Really interesting. Yeah, great.
Hi, I'm Abdullah from UNSW. I think that we are taking this too seriously, Gen AI. Gen AI is a tool just like a calculator. So if it gives us a wrong answer, the onus is not on the calculator, the onus is on us. So as humans, as people moderating Gen AI, I think we need to act more carefully, and blaming it all on Gen AI and the models and stuff, I think it's just making it a scapegoat. Yeah. So yeah, I think we need to act more rationally on this.
That's a great point, and I think particularly in the educational field, I imagine this this is something that lots of institutions are thinking about. I guess we've all seen the media around how Gen AI is being used to overcome writing time and such. So I imagine at UNSW this is something that you're looking at quite closely. Yeah, okay, great. Good to hear.
Honestly, I could argue either side of this one, but I'm coming pretty strongly to agreeing with this statement, based partly on the fact that we can say that the human scrutiny is obviously a required component, and I can think of dozens of examples of stories lately of blunders that AI have made that we know about, right? So racial bias creeping into loan approval systems, or there's a recent one I saw on AIs training AIs and pruning the training data set to get rid of all the outliers. That and those sorts of things us humans are pretty good at sanity checking and spotting, but we don't know what we don't know, right? So there could be a whole wealth of things that we're missing. The other factor that I think you have to consider is that when well-intended organizations are looking at scrutinizing their own AI's results, wonderful, but there are bad actors out there as well, right? So, the ill intent of the humans behind it, it's got pretty substantial potential, which I think we've actually seen in actions in things like US elections, for example, are huge, and I don't think we have any effective way to mitigate that currently.
Okay. And if you were to argue the other way, what would you say?
I think the obvious argument I started with was, our brains are still the most complex devices in the universe. AI, I don't believe, by the way, the predictions that we will have, fully sort of human-capable AI by 2030. I think we're not even close, and possibly we'll never get there. We're pretty good at oversight of these sorts of things. We're pretty good at seeing the holes. But I've also seen some pretty spectacular just data analytics blunders that don't get sanity checked. We make enough mistakes on the simple stuff. And I think there's too much we're going to miss. Sorry, I'm getting back to arguing for it.
I think we know which way you're voting.
Yeah, I think we all know that we're going to be scrutinizing these results, that without some human oversight, AIs are going to do some really dumb stuff. They don't have the right lens, they don't have the right context. But I don't think we'll ever stay on top of it well enough.
There's always going to be scope for human error. And given that at this point in time, generative AI is reliant on what we're producing, there is bound to be error in that. Any further? Oh, great, over here.
Just follow up on the point about the academic control using AI, because there's a real life example that when my kid's school, and one day the teacher turned in the whole class and saying half the class had plagiarized, and they interrogate EA girl saying why did you plagiarize? So they got psychological damage to all the kids, they were claiming they didn't do it. And then we find out subsequently the tool they use, they turn on the AI features to detect faults. And the success rate is around maybe 70%. So the question is that how do you properly address the control while we're still experimenting technologies and also experimenting the control process as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that probably applies across quite a few sectors, yeah. There was a question down the front here, yeah.
Like the other lady over there, I'm also debating with myself on both sides. I'm from UNSW as well. So for this argument, I see the risk is generative AI is creating, right? It's creating based on things that people contributed in the past. So there's a danger of we do not advance anymore as a human race, because we just rely on AI, generative AI, which is based on the past information. And the speed is unfair because we try to progress further. This one can drag us back, and it's run on much higher speed than our human brains, how quickly we can feed the right and more progressive information in. So we can be pulled back. However, on the flip side, for the same reason, as individual, we cannot process or possess information as fast, as vastly as a machine. So the machine can help us to grasp all the information that has happened in the past for us to formulate thoughts going forward. So I'm still debating with myself on both sides.
Is there anyone out there that can convince her either way? It's the question. There's the question at the back here.
Hey, Oki from IAG. I'm also in two minds of it. I think one of the biggest concerns I have is the ethical approach to Gen AI. As human beings, and what we see on all news channels on using Google, Yahoo, if that still exists, Microsoft Edge, all of those, misinformation is rife in the world at the moment. We're essentially providing content to a digital space that we can't control as humans on already existing spaces. So how can we actually ethically continue using something like Gen AI if there's no official framework in place? We've seen business practices that's so far from ethical, it's laughable, and then we make something like this available for them. So I think for me, I'm probably going to more agree with it until I at least know businesses provide something more ethical based. And I also believe to address and reduce the risk of it, businesses have a social responsibility to not just educate their staff, but if they do use Gen AI, it's their responsibility to educate their customers as well, and the implications that actually has on their customers or any third-party contracts that they might actually have.
I mean, so I guess one of the big questions around how you sort of regulate this space as well is around how you implement something that is ethical and protects consumers, but doesn't prevent innovation. Do you think that's possible to have both?
It is definitely possible to have both. However, I don't believe we're there yet. And we're already progressing so quickly with this that how can we ensure that the ethical standards are still there that we've got in place for our governments, for our medical practitioners, our lawyers, our finance sector. Without that base framework, moving forward is going to be very difficult, and then we're going to end up playing catch up with all the mistakes that comes from it.
Yep, question there.
So, first of all, there is a lot of misinformation about Gen AI. First of all, there is a lot of misinformation about Gen AI, and look, it depends on use case. Sometimes, if you have your own data, and you have your own model, and you are running Gen AI models, LLM models for a specific use case in your organization, and then there may not be a problem. But if you're using ChatGPT to generate some images or something, and posting it on Twitter or something, then that may be very harmful because it may not be easy to verify. Means people can verify, but not normal user, whether the images are real or not. So that is kind of misinformation. Having said that, there is no governance yet, and our services, cloud services, where we want to host our LLM models, they are not mature enough. Most of the cloud providers, they are still in like this initial phase of providing those services. These are not mature enough. But again, still there are some companies who are running in-house models, and that is a totally different story because that is a constrained environment and where the data is owned by the company, and it came from ethics, and it got collected by the approval of customer, and it came from in ethical way. So it's a very broad area, and we have to deep dive into what Gen AI is really doing, what are the factors, and that's it actually.
So do you think that open source is where it goes awry?
again, it's about the data. So if you look at the models, there are some open source models which will give you information from anywhere. But if you're giving information to customer about, then the data should be your own. You cannot pick the model from open source, which is trained by someone else, and use it to give feedback or to give input or for any automation process in your organization or to any customer. It has to be your own data, properly collected, where the ethics are coming from, and it has to be governed properly, that data. So we can also get, means that there was a question that, Gen AI means in AI, machine learning, we use old data. But we also keep training our models. If it is in-house models, we can keep training them. Data is ours. So we can make sure the data is being collected properly and it's being cleaned properly, and the values are PII and everything is being masked, and then we can push it in our environment. So there are a lot of things we have to consider. Gen AI we still have to explore a lot of stuff in this area. It's still a very new technology.
Kieran.
I love these conversations. And there's a lot of passion in the room. And to draw on a couple of the themes, is Gen AI a tool? Yes, it is. But it's a very convincing tool. And part of the problem is it creates whole new risks. Things like hallucination, things that we weren't really talking about in traditional data science and modeling are now out there because they're convincing and they're creative tools. But for those risks, if we think back to these principles of engineering and design, bias, fairness, drift, robustness, these can be mathematically measured. And regulation is taking time to catch up, but there are also AI standards and toolkits, some launched by governments, some in the open source community, that can help you measure that. So when we talk about this issue of accuracy that was mentioned earlier, there is a mathematical element to that. The question is, when you use this service, are you asking for that? Because it is measurable. And some of the black box algorithms or trillion parameter models are not revealing that. But there is a capability. If I said that I can give you a fact sheet, so you get a line of sight every time you access an output, that would increase your trust and understanding to act in the decision. But still, again, a human operator acting the decision, making a decision assistant. So I see a lot of potential here. The other question, though, is around ethics, because you can actually infuse values into these models and outcomes. This is a brave new world. Ethics is not necessarily a measurable outcome. It's something you steer or influence. And many countries and nation states have very different ethics. Yet, interestingly, they're also measurable outcomes. So for all these advances, and I'm happy to explore the capabilities, and I think there's fantastic innovation here, there is an element of measurability that I think should be more prominent. And looking towards that line of sight or that fact sheet, to me, is the next advance. That's the next demand that helps us accelerate real-world adoption.
Thanks, Kieran. We have a question just at this table here.
Hi, good afternoon. Jose Miguel from the University of Sydney. I've been working on governance of AI for a while now, and I have advised several regulators. And just one premise that we need to work on, which is the fallacy that these things can be measured. There has been the review of the standards, existing standards, and it's a pity that Aurelie is not with us anymore, but measurement of these things is, she is, okay, sorry, I didn't see you. Measurement of these things we are far away from getting, and the recent review that the ECAT, the European Centre for Algorithmic Transparency, has done of the IEEE standards have shown that they are underperforming in the task of measuring things to the level that we would need for regulatory purposes. So that's one. Second of all, when we have this premise, and it's a generative AI content and its disinformation are not properly addressed, the risk of the content is not properly addressed, or the risk of the generative AI is not properly addressed, because we're talking about two different things. If we are generating content that we cannot trust, what is the big risk? That we cannot trust the content that is real. And if we don't trust the content that is real, what do we miss? And well, if no one trusts anything, then there is no risk. So it is not that is not a real risk. And when I say we are not properly addressing it, is who's responsible to address it? It's like, are the firms responsible to address what they are putting out there, or are the users, or are the regulators controlling the users in the way they use the generative AI? So I think we are trying to find a balance, and we'll get there at some point. But in the meantime, better not to trust anything.
Well, that's bleak. Okay, we've got one last statement, and then think about your responses, guys.
Just to follow on from that, if we can't measure the performance and mitigate the risk because we don't know what it's generating, then it comes back to the original thing of the data. If you don't want your generative AI to be able to give somebody the instructions to make a nuclear weapon, don't put the instructions to make a nuclear weapon in the data, which means don't use all of the internet. It means think about and be conscious of what's in your data set, remove all the bias, all the risks that you want to prevent, and then train your model on that. And that's why I think if we're going to think about mitigating these risks, you always have to come back to the data, and you always have to demand from your vendors who are producing these models what data they used and what is in their data. That's a simple answer, I think.
I think that's a good note to leave it on before we poll you again. So if I can get another raise of hands for anyone who agrees with the statement. This House believes the risks of generative AI content and its disinformation are not properly addressed. Raise of hands for who agrees. Oh, okay, and a raise of hands for who disagrees. I think there's slightly less. I think you've swayed a few people. So thank you very much for participating in the interactive discussion. It was great. You're very chatty. Keep being chatty. We're going to take a break now, and then we'll be back with another panel discussion after that. Welcome back from the break, everyone. I hope you've all got a coffee, ready to do some more listening, asking of questions, interacting through the next discussion as well, which Charles will be back on stage to host after this final panel's discussion. Before I get the next panel of experts up on stage, I'll just give you a bit of context as to where we're going with this next session. So, much like what we've discussed already today, having well-governed and trusted data is important when building AI models and applications. Trustworthy AI is typically meant to be lawful, ethical, and technically robust. As organisations step into the data-driven era, which rests on a foundation of trusted data, they are being called on to make their data and AI models transparent, fair, reliable, and privacy-centric. So if I can welcome up onto the stage the expert panellists now. We have Amy Shee-Nash, the Chief Data and Analytics Officer from Tabcorp. We have Susan Gibson, the Head of Data Analytics and AI at the University of Technology, Sydney. And we have Samantha Lawson, the Vice President of Digital Channels and Customer Success Strategy at Optus. Thank you all for joining. So just to say again that if you do have a question throughout the session, please raise your hand. We have roaming mics. Feel free to get involved in the discussion. So we did touch on this in the previous panel, but I'm keen to get your thoughts on it also. With different requirements across different sectors, how can we ensure AI safety? And let's start with you. And we'll go down the line. Sorry.
Different requirements, how do we ensure safety?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think one of the key things is that, for me, is that every use case has a different set of safety requirements. I've worked in healthcare, banking, telco, retail, in a lot of different jurisdictions. So US, UK, Australia, to name a few. And it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and you guys would know that because you're from various industries. It's really important that it's context specific, and for that you already have regulatory bodies who are very close to how to protect customers in those industries, and so I think it's important to work with them to tailor what's required rather than over encompassing regulation that is AI specific across all industries. I think there's a role there for safety in critical industries like security and nuclear and things like that. But if it was just at that level, I think you run into it not being suitable from a safety perspective in any particular domain.
Yeah, looking for sort of a tailored response. Susan, what are your thoughts on this?
I think there's a couple of things that can make a big difference more broadly across organisations, and they are training and making sure everyone understands what is possible with AI, but not just what's possible, but the actual people who are developing the AI systems really know how they fit together and how they're actually working. I think especially generative AI, everyone seems to think it's a plug and play, but there's actually quite a lot more to it. And then I'd say good governance, whatever that looks like. And I think that starts at data. I think most of us have got pretty solid data governance, privacy governance. Cyber has been considered for quite some time. And then follow that up with your AI governance and making sure that you've got really practical ways of working through that that are easily understood and can be applied to each different use case.
Amy?
Yeah, I think at the moment, probably the most dangerous thing, I think, is the overhype on everything. Not only just on the benefits and the risk, and it's essentially the noise and the hypes and just overtaking the conversation. So it's becoming more and more opinion-led or attention-seeking sort of statements. I think to ensure the AI safety, really, we need to go back to the basics. Really, uplift our knowledge in this subjects, and also really, going into all these stuff we just talked about with the previous panel and all the audience, I think, really understand, do we have the right data? What do we feed into the model? How does the model, the maturity, is it the right model? Actually, do we need that complex? And how do we know how it's going to behave? Is this the right use case? Should we deploy it? And how do we anticipate? All of these things, I think if we really think about that, having a good judgment from the human side of things is going to help us with the this AI safety.
I mean, judgment can be subjective though, can't it? I think it would be useful to give the audience a little bit of an idea of what this looks like in practice. And so Samantha, I might start with you, and then Amy, if you wouldn't mind jumping in afterwards. Can you give some examples of what some use cases are of sort of data and analytics being used throughout strategies and implemented throughout the business as use of AI becomes more widespread?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the conversation around trust and safety has been fueled by the conversation around generative AI, right? As opposed to other sorts of AI which have been safely used for a very long period of time. In that context, I think we've seen varied predictability of AI based on the fact that those tools, like an LLM is a very, very general purpose tool to start out with, but there are so many methods of reducing the variability when you apply it to a specific domain or problem. And the risk profile is very different, right? And so customer service is a great example of where we can really use generative AI to improve how we serve customers, automate how we serve customers, resolve issues faster and better than we do today. Now, in that regard, there are different ways you can look at using LLMs to do customer service, and there's different risk profiles of that. If you're doing it in medicine, it's very, very different than if you're doing it in grocery, right? And then even within that, to get confident with what the model is doing, you can really ground it in domain-based knowledge. You don't just have like a raw LLM. GPT is not a raw LLM. It's a pre-trained LLM for that purpose. And so you can train your models. You can start with use cases that are low risk, take a risk-based approach, things like customer service in non-risky environments. You can also script for agents and have a human in the loop before you then automate. There's lots of ways you can go about it in a safe way. I think there's a lot more talk about the risks than there are around the practical applications and how they can be done safely at this point in time. But there are so many use cases. Like there are dozens in every industry, and some of them are safe, some of them aren't. I think one of the things that gets lost is if we take the approach that, oh, here's AI, let's find us a problem for it to solve, you're not going to be in the mindset of customer first, customers obsessed. Are we delivering great outcomes? Are we solving real problems? And if you come at from that point of view, I think you end up implicitly designing for safety and trust and security and transparency, right? Whether you're using generative AI, like data and analytics, or to any sort of technology, it's a very different place to come from versus I've got a fun new tool, let's throw it at it like some sort of problem. And I've seen a lot of this. I've seen a lot of very smart people who know how to build AI products and services but do not understand where they're being used and what good and commercial application looks like. And that's where I think industry really has a job to partner with technology companies who have the skills, but they really don't know how to put it to practice.
I mean, this actually came up in one of the research programs that we undertook, looking at digital capabilities within the workplace, and Australian executives said that sort of AI, and as a subset of that, Gen AI, will be the most effectively used technology within the next 3 years. But that was also sort of aligned with the fact that partnerships, PPPs, public-private partnerships, will be so important moving forward as well. So it's really interesting to hear you say that. Just bringing back to that point around predictability, when we're thinking about the way that generative AI is developing, it's fairly unpredictable. How do you think, as an organisation, you sort of manage that?
in the way that you don't know where it's going to go next, or in the way that the products that are provided to us right now by some of these builders or ones we're building have variability? Which question?
The former.
Oh, the former. I think, like with any technology, you can never really, predict, like until you get something like Moore's Law to help you. I think it's hard to know, right? So I've been working in emerging technology for a while now. I think you need to take like a test and learn approach within boundaries. So set really strong principles, have great governance, and within that, test in safe environments. So rapidly experiment with it. You don't have to release things for the first time to we do this in technology anyway. You don't always have to release them to your customers. You can release them to employees. You can do an alpha or a beta test group. You can get people to opt in to these things and test if they're working. I think you really need to have a really good view of what does success look like? How do I measure it? How do I monitor it? What's the tooling I need in order to know that the model's doing what it should, it's delivering a good outcome, it's not drifting over time. We're still not there from an enterprise stack perspective. But if you put all that in, I think one of the things that we should really do is not be overconfident in our own knowledge. So in the setting of policy, in the setting of the expectations of what these things can deliver, I think we need to experiment to know. And so not overstating how confident we are that we know all the answers, being exploratory in that, but also, just having an eye on and being plugged into where it can potentially go. And I think, thinking about, I have some conversations with people and they think about generative AI as chatbots, and I think that's massively underestimating its potential. And I think where some people are going with it, and I sort of think this is where it's headed, is it's probably going to have a lot more value as almost like the kernel of an operating model or an orchestration engine than just responding, with the data in which it's been pre-trained. So I think there's, surround yourself with people who are really intelligent on these topics, put it into practice, and then keep going through that cycle.
Interesting. Amy, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, by the way, I totally agree on many of these, but I think one of the main thing about preparing the organization, to adopt AI is really critical at the moment. And I think we don't need to have all the answers. Nobody have all the answers, but really having an approach and write it down, publish internally if you can, is going to be really helpful. So we just gone through, this exercise, and we take our board through our approach and basically talking about first one, what is the untapped opportunity for us? It's not about using machine learning because we're already using it. We really want to emphasize where is the opportunity that can be unlocked by AI. So you have a purpose and you have a statement before we're looking at the solution. And then the second one is where is the user cases we're currently exploring, as there's a lot of those things, and it's all, everyone has a big long list. So having a framework and kind of how do you prioritize and, sort of the feasibility, the risk level, as well as the benefit, how do we structure this in a way you can actually get a feel of where you should focus on. And I think the last one, obviously, is how to build up the practice, in the AI governance. So there are so many, high-level stuff, but how are you going to do it on a day-to-day basis is still, it's not normally, exist. In banking, I think it's probably more, and the telco, more established. But if you look at other industries and stuff, maybe less. So having a practical ways of how to build that up, improving the literacy, I think improving just the education within the organization, and those kind of things are really going to help. From the user case point of view, I think we mentioned quite a few of these. I think a generative AI, if we look at it, it really allows us to talk in the human language, especially with customers. So we have, for example, quite a lot of data assets which we own, like TV footage and this sort of thing. And it is great rich data, but we are unable to use it easily because it's unstructured, it's video, it's got commentators and it got loads of amazing information. So the first thing, if we can convert those into something more structured in real time, and maybe even in the different languages, it's going to help us to engage customer. Those are sort of a use case, they really give it a new opportunity. So how do we leverage? Where do we put it? In the safer, low-risk environment, looking at a controlled environment, looking at an internal use case, looking at summarize things, but not directly having a conversation with the customers, for example. Those are kind of areas we can explore and learn. I think everything is about a maturity, about understanding how these models would behave and what sort of data you have. There is no other way that you have to test it, and you have to test it. And then the end-to-end use case in terms of predictability. Yes, there's the end-to-end, the process is going to change, right? To scale up and to realize the benefit, you have to have different processes, and quite often the efficiency as well as the new sort of engagement level will give you that kind of the new value. So all of these are about having mapped them out and really focus on those. We're just starting to explore, just as probably everybody sitting in the room. And I think it's very different. It's not prototyping that difficult because you can prototype something pretty fast. But if you map out, where the things got to change, where you got to put human in there, who are the end users? The end users are totally different. And when you're doing the test, we talked about this in quite a bit of a debate, the last one. It's a total different new test. So all of these need to be think about. I think that contributes into how do you kind of prepare the organization, think about things in a more organized way and consistent across the organization. That's probably one of the things we could do, practically to make sure those are the safe applications.
Yeah. I want to go back to a point that both Amy and Samantha made around governance. And I'm interested to know, Susan, from your perspective, what does good governance look like, and how would you put that down on paper?
Okay, so good governance to me is really understanding working through and really understanding what you're committing to. So from our perspective, we created an AI policy, so the whole of the university understand what the AI operations policy is, and that really is baked in certain ethics principles. Underneath that, we've got procedures that really tease out those ethics processes. And so I don't think anyone comes to you with an idea which they don't want to be ethical with, but just teasing out that I think is really important. I think you need to have diversity of thought when you work through these ethics principles, and make sure that you have certainly considered also the customer. So we have quite a detailed process, I guess, and then we have an AI governance board that oversees all of those processes. And in there, we've actually got student representation as well, so that to ensure that we're transparent with what we're doing, which is one of our ethical considerations. So I guess that worked, and we were able to get on the front foot with predictive. Generative is coming out so quickly, and everyone's sort of catching up and working through that, I think, in parallel to actually wanting to do something. From that perspective, we're working on things like ensuring that people understand what they can and can't do with generative AI, everything from obviously not putting in confidential information into a public chat GPT, but also making sure that you fact check and make sure you've got domain knowledge before you utilise it. So, yeah, I think making sure that there's a clear process that's well understood across the organisation.
Yeah. I'll pause briefly here just to see if there are any questions, because I know we timed out last time and I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to ask questions. Yep, got one just at the back here. Thanks, Fabio.
Hi, my name's Ivy and I'm from IAG. So just a thought around the ethicality, I suppose, with generative AI. If we're talking about potentially replacing jobs or if it might limit jobs and replace a process or something. And by the way, I believe that AI is completely complementary to roles, so don't worry, I'm very pro AI. But just in thought of like a contingency process and no dig at Optus, but if it was to go down or something was to happen, like what are the contingencies that would be in place for if AI was to break or something was to go wrong and like a big risk was to happen, hypothetically like a cybersecurity attack or so on? What are those contingencies in place?
I'm happy to lead into this one. So I think, we are increasingly reliant on technology, AI or not, and automation's been around for a very long time, right, in different forms. We also are increasingly reliant on the internet. We don't have cash anymore, right? And so we can't pay for anything when you don't have connectivity or electricity. So we are entirely reliant on things that could stop at any point in time, which is not meant to make you feel any better. But in building those systems, we need redundancy. And we have to plan for redundancy. And sometimes even when you plan for redundancy, it fails. And so you have to learn from that around, did we plan enough? Or do we need to think now, because our reliance is so much greater than it was, because it might have been 10% of things critical on electronic payments before, and now it's 99%. As that increased penetration happens, you have to think differently about your redundancy. And I'm not sure that we're all there yet on AI, to the point where, if you have so many fewer workers and something happens, what do you do? And so we have to plan for that. And as part of the setting the right principles in place, understanding the operational implications of the use cases you are building, playing it forward, war rooming, red teaming, chaos monkey style, try and take it down, and get back up quickly. So it's a really good question and something we need to plan for, that you have enough redundancy. And one of the things that I think we need to be conscious of is the death of apprenticeship, in that if you don't need your junior knowledge workers, how do they get the experience to know that the AI is doing the right thing, right? Or how do they think about redundancy if they've never existed in a world where they needed redundancy, because everything sort of worked? So I think in our planning, but also in the training of our people, we need to think about that.
I think it's quite interesting. There's the complementary kind of roles of a human and a machine. It just makes things so much better, with generative AI, because we can actually talk to the machine directly, where previously you have to be a data scientist, to build a model and do things. And then that's also changed the end user. So I feel like some of the really challenge is how do we get all the end users actually understand how to use this thing, and the creativity actually coming from you doing the job, you're doing really well, and you can actually tease out much more than potentially somebody don't know the domain. So that's sort of a combination, and also amplify what you can do, as really good at this job, and really create that communication going, and you can drive so much more than a human or the machine on their own. So I think the job front, I'm quite optimistic about, it's not going to take out a lot of jobs. It's going to take up some of the efficiency through the automation. But I think the real communication, the real art of providing a service and experience and the creativity is going to become a lot more and a lot better with this.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. So, we're probably moving to a world where largely call centres, which are now staffed with hundreds of thousands of humans in usually Asia or other countries, will be much, much more skilled, highly skilled but smaller numbers of humans, right? And so, but in the same way that when, you know, if a computer system goes down or like a manufacturing plant goes down, you know, we don't all go, where are the humans that used to do the calculations?
Yeah.
We just focus on how we get back up more quickly. We'll evolve.
Yeah, we have another question. Thank you.
Hi, Oki, also IAG, and this is actually directed just at Susan, more than anything. With Gen AI and AI in general, what do you believe the future impacts will be on the education system? The assignments, learning design, are you worried about plagiarism? Are you worried about intellectual property theft? All of those things, and do you actually think it will impact admissions as well? Because AI and technology is advancing so quickly, will there be an implication on admissions as well?
Wow, that's a big question.
Just a few things to cover there.
Okay, I'll take. So certainly, we're looking at teaching and learning is very much focused on how we should be doing assessments. We are embracing AI as generally as a university. Not to say that you can use AI in all assessments, but you'll be told up front where you can and can't use AI. We don't. We do want to change and make people think differently, and we want our students to be able to use it as a tool as they enter the workforce. So we're going back to sort of calculators as they came in. It's changing those questions, I think. So it is very different, but there's a lot of conversations, and what is really nice is seeing all of the educational institutions actually working through this together, because it kind of hit them overnight, and suddenly we were having to deal with it. So used appropriately is actually a good tool. What's happening in the whole education sector? That's an even bigger question, I guess. Look, it's really hard to say, but I think certainly what we are seeing is that people need to be educated, and it's becoming more and more important to be educated, to be able to utilise what we have available. So the lower level jobs are the ones who are likely to be the ones that will likely to disappear. But how things like the professions change, it will be very interesting over the next few years. So at the moment, I think what will happen is that certain careers will change. Certainly education is moving very quickly to cater for these changing requirements of our students. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball of what's happening with education, but it is certainly, everyone is very aware of the changes and trying to react appropriately.
Thank you. I think we had one more question down the front here as well.
I've got a two-part question. One is that, what are your organization initiative about social responsible AI? For example, tapping on user profile to prevent problem gamblers or phonetics using your service when you detect the patterns. And the second part is that how do you balancing between a big brother watching, invading privacy versus being social responsible?
I can make a start. So I think we are 100% using data in terms of identify and anticipate what is the behavior side from our customers' point of view. So this is one of the key kind of a brand value proposition. So we are having a Mindway AI, which is a partner, looking at combining data-driven plus neuroscience and the human kind of context and stuff, combine that together in the profile. So when we profile the customers, we actually understand some of the key elements of behavior, such as loss chasing behavior, for example, the amount of time and the intensity and your acceleration, these sort of things with more powerful model using more digital signals, for example, which the traditional machine learning models is going to be difficult to take advantage of. So those are really real kind of opportunity for us to do much more preventative and also very personalized. Also, we're looking at, I was just in last couple of weeks and be talking about the beneficial friction sort of ideas with some of the researchers in the universities. So the ideas around people turn to get into autopilot, and with all this, advanced, particularly AI capabilities, you just kind of are not aware of things are happening. So at the right moment, introducing more frictions is actually improve, people's consciousness or awareness, or, certain things can actually improve that experience. So there's tons of things, I think, to do the right things that will drive, how do we use data and how do we put into the experience and engagement sort of as in the direction. On the other side, obviously, you can't overplay because being, watching, you need to get a consent, basically. So you need to have a very transparent of what you're looking, what are the things you need to measure, with all of the right sort of, just make it a very transparent. And sometimes, lots of the industry practice now is also moving away from the third-party cookies and things like that, using more first-party, and then you just make it very clear to the consumers of what you're collecting, how do we use the data for different purposes. I think, being more transparent is only going to improve that relationship and building that trustworthiness over time. So not sure if...
No, I totally agree. So absolutely on transparency, on consent, right? So we will only ever contact people who consent to be contacted. I think there's actually, so while there is, in getting far more personalised, the risk that it is misused, I think there's also flip side of that, the ability to really understand what the right thing for the customer is deeply and inherently. And so things that were difficult before are a lot easier now. So understanding if a customer has not paid a bill, don't send them an advertisement, right? Because they might be send them are you in financial distress? Do you need a payment extension message instead? So you can actually really improve the customer experience, understand their needs more deeply. I think sometimes in use cases, there's a lot of should we, shouldn't we, which I think people struggle with. And so we have what's called a trust forum. And the real purpose of that is to ask ourselves, because we have all these other risk forums, right? But we're just, do you have confidence that all of those things are fit for purposes when technology is moving so fast? And so we have this super sort of governance body that says, ask the question, will our customers trust us more or less if they knew we were doing this? And it has to be yes, or we shouldn't do it. And so even if we'd sell more or whatever it is, we shouldn't do it if it doesn't pass our principles, and that is around being socially beneficial for people and the community, as well as transparent, secure, privacy by design, a whole lot of other things that we govern by.
I think that's a really positive note to end the discussion on. Big thank you to our expert panelists, Samantha, Susan and Amy, for coming and joining today and sharing their insights. We are about to enter the final session, so I'll invite Charles back up on stage to get you guys chatting again.
Excellent. Thank you, Les. Hope people are still chatty. End of the day, you've refueled with coffee a little bit earlier on because we have another debate going on, and hopefully we get maybe a bit more of a balance on the sort of yays and nays in terms of this debate. So same structure as last time. We have a question for you. I'm going to get a raise of hands around that question, and then we're going to get some opinions and some views and hopefully some healthy disagreement. So the question is, this House believes AI cannot be trusted to make decisions. Have a think about that one.
this house believes AI cannot be trusted to make decisions. I love this question. I've definitely got a view on this one. So let's have a pause and let's have a show of hands. So who agrees with this statement that the AI cannot be trusted to make decisions? Who agrees with that one? Cannot be trusted. Okay, excellent. We've probably, it's maybe just under half the room, maybe. So who disagrees with this? That AI can actually be trusted, AI can actually be trusted to make decisions. Okay, actually, we're fairly well divided, I think, on this one. That is fantastic. I'm going to pick on you first, Kieran, mainly because you were sitting in the front row with your hand up, with a big smile on your face. So clearly you have something super interesting to share on this one. So you actually believe that AI cannot be trusted to make decisions. Have you had a bad problem in the past, or?
Yeah, but that's not why. Let me just clarify that. I don't believe AI should be trusted to make autonomous decisions. So I believe there's a really good background to next-based actions, but I believe its best use is to be a decision assistant and optimize human accountability towards an outcome. Because at the heart, I think AI is a productivity tool, not necessarily a single point of accountability or autonomy.
Does anyone disagree with that? AI cannot be made to make autonomous decisions? Yes?
I think it depends on how important the decision is. So if you're using AI to, say, move pieces around in Go or chess, then by all means, let it make its decision. You might beat it, you might lose against it. But it just really comes down to how important the decision is. If it's a medical decision, obviously not. You've got to vet it. But yeah, it depends on the problem that it's trying to solve.
So I disagree with you, actually. So when we think about autonomous vehicles, we are going to get to that point in the future, and the AI is going to have to make the decisions around driving those autonomous vehicles. And I personally I'd feel more comfortable getting into an autonomous vehicle than a taxi, where I don't know what the driver's been doing prior to sort of picking me up. I know that people are fallible and make mistakes, and sort of, technology does make some mistakes, but in my view, my opinion, they're much fewer and much rarer than the human in this situation. So I'm more of an autonomous vehicle person. I would do that. We have a point here.
I'm with you, and it's a trade-off thing, especially when we're replacing a human decision with a machine-driven decision, and it is the threshold. When do we start trusting the machine? And it's pretty much, do we compare it with the average human, or do we compare it with the best human maker decision? And the moment it outperforms, on average, on like historic records of decisions after testing and after having it in parallel to a human, it outperforms the best human maker, decision maker. Look, it's going to make mistakes, yes, but the alternative, it's going to make more mistakes. So at that point, I think is when we can trust AI.
Well, that's a good point. So, so I would trust and get in a car with Daniel Ricciardo, for example, but maybe not the average taxi driver. I would trust him more than the AI. I think I would be safe there. And I'd probably get home quicker as well.
The question was reversed.
Yes.
You were actually a pedestrian.
Yes.
Would you rather be a pedestrian for an autonomous vehicle or a taxi driver? That's the question.
You know what? I want to be looking under the hood to see if there's an issue. Is the taxi driver the autonomous vehicle, is it going to prioritize me as the pedestrian, or is it going to be doing something else? I'd want to know what the data, what the algorithm looks like sort of underneath that. So yeah, I'm not sure. I would probably sit on the fence with that one. I mean, we need some regulation. We need some guardrails around autonomous vehicles, don't we? We need to know if X happens, what is the autonomous vehicle going to do? I want a bit more clarity on that. I know, what would you do? Which side are you sitting on this?
I would rather be, it's an interesting one. I think I would rather, on the autonomous vehicle side, I think I'd rather be a pedestrian for a real driver at this stage in the cycle than an autonomous vehicle.
Yep.
For a number of reasons. It's got to do with human reaction and so on that goes with it. But I largely, actually, I'm one of Kieran's colleagues. I work at IBM, but I do disagree with him on this one as well. I'm probably more aligned here. I think AI can be trusted to make the right type of decisions that are suited to be made autonomously based on high quality, governed, trusted data.
Yeah.
I think that we can, and we have been doing that for a very long time. I think machines right now, computers make decisions on data every moment of every day. If I want to log onto my internet banking, it's making a decision on whether to allow me to authenticate or not. It's looking at a whole lot of different things. Have I logged on this network before? What's my location? I'm from Melbourne, but now I'm in Sydney. There's a whole lot of things that go on behind that. We're using AI, maybe not generative AI, but earlier forms of AI today for decision making. So I do think it can be trusted, but once again, I think it's that governance of data and the trust in the data, and then of course the measurement of the process that you've got to have in place to allow it to happen.
Yeah, you're right. We have been sort of leveraging this for a long time. I mean, Google Maps, for example, giving us routes home, and then when it updates based on traffic changes and stuff like that, it tells you to go a different route. I trust that. I know for a fact my mother does not trust that, for sure. I don't know, so it's a generational thing, maybe. Any other points? We've got one here.
I think it depends entirely on the stakes of the decision. Like, as you said, like, we've got plenty of AI out there already making decisions for the thing. And thinking one of the earliest projects I was involved in using AI was churn and customer lifetime value modeling at the NRMA. And we just divided people into treatments. What do we ring them 2 days after their bill is due to chase them for it? Kind of depends on whether we're making any money off them or not, whether we bother with that phone call. Very low stakes decision. If someone ends up in the wrong bucket, a little bit sad. We might lose a customer that, you know, one of our millions of customers because we bucketed them the wrong way. But it's very, very low stakes. Whereas, you know, whether to run over the pedestrian or try to save the driver is a little bit of a different category.
Yes, we've got a point over here.
Yeah, hi Charles. Nicholas from IBM. I think the other side of the coin is the payoff. And I think we're looking very much at trust. Is it right? Blah, blah, blah. I heard a survey about people who have either taken autonomous vehicles or are willing to. And in the top 5 things, what would you do in an autonomous vehicle? I think one of the top answers was sleep. Others were read or work. I think romance was in the top 5. So, presuming there was more than one. Yeah, I think as we behave, and also different parts of our society would have a different answer to that.
Yeah.
Depending on the payoff. If you're looking at medicine, for example, if you're in very, I guess, bad state in cancer treatment or whatnot, you might choose to go for something that might give you hope or not. So, yeah, I think there's ethical boundaries and also generational boundaries there.
Yeah, great. Adam, question in the front here.
When I think about trust and people making mistakes, the thing we can do to a person who's made a mistake is we can ask what led to that error. I think part of, and we then trust that person because they may have learned, and we can teach them about that. When an AI makes a mistake, we don't always have that explainability. We don't have that ability to then ask, and we have to do a lot of work to interrogate. And there's been studies with generative AI that's actually shown that when you ask it to explain, it actually just straight up lies. And so it's because it's just an expert predictor. It's just saying what it thinks is right, or what is the most probabilistic output of there. So I think our challenge is explaining the AI and ensuring we have explainability behind AI, so then we can build that trust.
Yeah. Yes.
I probably want to reframe the question that it's not whether AI can make decision or not. It's actually people's trust on the AI technologies. So using the example of an autonomous vehicle, we can sign a form away, then we say let the car drive. But when it involves an accident, is the car owner still liable, paying for the damage or the injuries? And same for whether the manufacturer is actually the entity liable for. So the trust thing is that AI is like humans. Not all humans are the same, and not all AIs are the same, and not all the AI decisions are making the right decisions. So it's more perception of the decision maker to whether they're using technology and make the final call. And like in our society working around human-oriented society, individuals accountable for their actions. So it's individuals got to make the final decisions, not the technology they use.
One in front.
This is a philosophical question. And first of all,
yeah, just a bit higher. No, it's on. It's on.
Human, they make mistake too. So we all make mistakes. So having said that, generative AI is part of subset of machine learning, and AI is very broad. It's machine learning is subset of AI. So when we talk about AI, we talk about augmented reality, we talk about image processing. There are a lot of things there. So autonomous driving is one of those subset. So if you will look at, we have already been using AI for a long time. Drones, how long have we been using drones and accurately? Mining, we have been using AI in mining. Medical, so we have already been using AI, but the point is, when it comes to machine learning itself, it's all about data, quality of data. So if we have good data, then we will be able to make good decisions. If we don't have bad data, then our decisions will be bad. Same thing, like if I will read a bad book and I will come to an interview, you will ask me questions. I will not be able to answer the questions. But if I will read a good book and you will ask the questions, I will be able to answer the good I will able to answer your questions. So same thing, it's all about data, where the models are getting their information from. And AI depends on sensors, again data, but it's coming from different sensors, the accuracy of sensors, quality of sensors. A few months back, a sub was in an ocean. A sub, it got destroyed. I forgot the name of the sub, because they were then there was a very cheap hardware they were using. So if we have to invest in that data and our hardware, only then we will be able to get proper results.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. I mean, I think we've purposefully set the question up like this to just say AI, but we know AIs are not all created equal. They're not all the same. I wonder if we would get a different response if I strip generative AI out of this question, because I think that's the area where there is still a lot of, there's a lack of trust, certainly around generative AI. We probably all read about that great example in the US of the lawyer that decided to use generative AI to do his case research and then relied on that in court, and it was all fictitious rubbish, and the judge threw him out. And now they changed the law, I think, in that state, so you have to sign a document to say, I didn't use generative AI, and they're sort of making of this case. We've seen that, and this is sort of contributes to this lack of trust around it. We just don't really sort of believe it. That's generative AI. I think AI, which you were discussing before, is something different, where we have a bit more trust. There's some real data behind this. It might be real-time data from sensors, from behavioural activity related type of data, and we have more trust in that type of stuff. We have a question.
Not really a question, just a comment building on your what seems like a reference to Elon Musk, SpaceX, and the autonomous cars that he built. One of the things I think a few different people have said in a lot of different ways is the data input and around like your trust of those, or the AI's ability to gather that information correctly, is probably at the core of the non-generative side of this. I think, would you trust a car that had radar versus a car that's using the image processing? You get mixed views on that. In the same sense, if you had a taxi driver on a phone call arguing with their partner or someone, would you trust that person to drive you around, or to, if you were the pedestrian in that case, versus radar versus, that photo imagery. So I think it's really interesting to sort of see that, like, even amongst this group of people who are very well versed with, some of this stuff, you get different views on those things. But then to think about the wider community, their awareness or understanding of any of those things to even comprehend that it's anything more than just something that makes up rubbish is really difficult. So if you look at this house, I think amongst this group you get a very different response to what you get from the wider community, and that's probably the bigger change that has to take place long term.
Yes, comment here.
Thank you. I just have a quick like insight there. So I really liked what you raised just now, that, you know, like if there's an accident happening, then who's responsible? But maybe like both of the cars are AI driven and someone has programmed it, right? It's human being eventually. AI is not all by itself. There's in the background, there's human intelligence, and maybe they are questionable there, maybe they're responsible. And that's where I was like, referring to Adam's point as well, that, you know, like, who's responsible? How can we teach them, or like how can we make it better for next time? But with AI as well, there is maybe the programming, there's some lack or some mistakes there, and a human is responsible there, and maybe we can go back to that person, revise that and get it better. So I think it's always possible as well.
I mean, there definitely needs to be that feedback loop, doesn't there, to be able to improve it and train it as we go, provided we have those sort of guardrails in place to do that. We have a comment at the back.
Yeah, kind of just to follow that point a little bit there, when we think about AI, and it's also that user experience, so the person that's asking the AI that particular kind of question, if they pose it in a certain way, that response may actually change, which will then determine what that decision would be. And my example that I have is actually, we had Ernst & Young come to our organisation, and they were talking to us about AI, and they used this example that I just died at. They were saying that a man asked the AI, the sky, I heard that the sky isn't blue, is that correct? And the AI was like, no, the sky is blue. And he's like, but my wife told me that the sky isn't blue, the sky isn't blue. And then the AI was like, no, you're right, the sky isn't blue, your wife's right. And so that kind of stuck with me, and it's like the way that someone poses a particular question could determine that answer that the AI is actually going to come up with. And that was based on data and information saying, your wife is always right, your wife is always right in the background. So it can kind of be argued both ways. Yeah. So, yeah.
It's a very smart AI if it always says your wife is always right. Very smart.
For me, I definitely don't trust it, because I'm a firm believer that we make decisions as well based on emotion. AI does not have emotional capability. So the data that we put in, there's no emotion behind it. So depending on the question that's being asked, yes, if it's black and white, is the sky blue? No. Great. Is the grass green? Yes. That menial questions I can trust, because that's data in there. If it's something in the medical field, definitely not, because there's an emotional aspect attached to it that AI would never be able to actually provide.
Isn't the emotion part of it the thing that actually makes us humans make bad decisions?
Not yes and no. But
sorry, you can go next if you like. Hang on.
Yes, emotion does allow us to make bad and good decision, but it's still a decision with some form of emotional intelligence. I mean, if we really go down to the people with no emotional intelligence, you know, it's a very different story. But overall, no, without that, you can't. Isn't that what humanity is as well? Are we stripping what humanity is out to rely heavily on technology? And based on your car, humans are fallible, technology is corruptible.
What if humanity can be programmed into the AI from learning from history? Sorry, you'll go.
Oh, no, I was just saying the history of all the biases is coming into data because of human emotions. So ideally what we are trying to say is emotional intelligence is individualistic. It's person, it's context, it's the situation, it's the growing up, it's the environment, it's the people that you work around with. So can't you build that same thing in AI? Can't you have that kind of a context? Can't you have that understanding with that with the machine in itself? I think that's possible. So I definitely believe it's all the emotional intelligence, all the emotions is what creates every problem, pretty much, because it's very individualistic.
Yeah.
So that's what
it's true. Yes.
I think this is a very ethically
question. Like if you're saying you trust the autonomous vehicle because someone programmed it, you're basically trusting whoever programmed it. But would you make the same decision if you were the driver as the person that programmed it? And how do you know? Like I say one thing, but when I'm driving and I'm facing a situation of danger, I might say right now that I would choose to avoid the pedestrian and save myself, but maybe in the situation I lose control and I kill us both. Like,
yeah,
it's so difficult, but emotion at the same time. Like, yes, who said it? Like, it is me that is making the decision, and it's you're putting that responsibility on someone else, and you don't really know what they're putting in. So the data itself is super important. Like, would you trust medical AI? Maybe, but what data is it going through? Like, is it just white males that are putting the data? Or is it females? Or is it black females? Or is it Hispanic females? So there's a lot of context that needs to be put in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would certainly want the AI or the autonomous vehicle or whatever it's running on in terms of decision making to be tested to an inch of its life in a million billion sorts of scenarios to understand what its decision making is going to be there. And I'm a data driven type of person. So at the end of the day, if there's a 1% chance that autonomous vehicle is going to crash, and I'm balancing this out to sort of a 50% chance that a human is going to crash, then I'll go with the autonomous. I'll take that sort of 1% risk. We don't have too much time left, but let's have three more comments left, I think, quick ones.
So emotional factor is a good question, right? It's a part of the decision factor making process. Because I got a good example that I got a friend who is actually writing a program to do future margin call exchange investing at nighttime, so he can sleep, doesn't need to get up for the US market. But he put his trust on his program to actually make money for him. And he took his whole personal emotional out. And it's interesting, he posts on the group that like every day they're saying the AI is actually sometimes making good decision, but sometimes actually making worse decision than he does. So emotional can be a wild card, but on the other hand, that like, do you actually want emotion to be involved in the decision-making process?
Excellent.
Just on the autonomous vehicles, because it seems to really have struck a chord. But here's something that we got to keep in mind. Australia is a world leader in autonomous vehicles. Right now today in the Pilbara, there are 2 kilometre long trains, driverless, that are taking precious cargo, thousands of kilometres from the Pilbara up to the ports, Port Hedland and beyond. They have a set of cameras on the trains that use AI and machine learning. They look at, and then at the different railway stations, level crossings. The camera can decipher between something that is a kangaroo that's on a track to slow or stop the train, or something that may just be tumbleweed blowing across the track that it can go on. So right now today we have AI-driven autonomous vehicles doing thousands of kilometres in Australia.
Yep.
But you can't hop on at Central and go to St Leonard's in a driverless train. And I think that is where someone mentioned before, it's an ethical thing as well. And again, you apply that to the autonomous vehicle. Well, what if it could make, if you were in that scenario, if you were a pedestrian and you would go, okay, it's okay for the autonomous vehicle to make the decision. What if there were 5 pedestrians and they were all at risk? And so I think there's a deeper seated ethical dilemma about how you take take this answer from a very, a situation that puts humans at risk versus, is out in the Pilbara delivering iron ore. So
it's a good. Well, yeah, I think that's a good question. Someone's programmed for that. Do you stop a 2 kilometre long train for one kangaroo? All the energy required to brake and then start again, and I don't know, that's been programmed in. We should be able to know that information, whether it prioritises a kangaroo over its own sort of train schedule.
What I think was very interesting about this question is some of the conversation turned in, can you believe humans should be trusted to make decisions? So let's turn that around and say, well, if maybe a human being can't be trusted to make decisions and I choose to make OI, I can respect that decision too. So maybe it's just about informed consent.
Well, this is true. Can humans be trusted to make decisions? Well, we have the US presidential election coming up next year. We'll see what happens. But we are unfortunately out of time. I, like Liz, was a bit worried that these sessions we wouldn't get enough feedback from the audience, but it's been fantastic. Thank you for all your comments and your contributions. One last test, people raising of hands. Raise your hand if you believe that AI cannot be trusted to make decisions. AI cannot be trusted to make decisions. Okay, it's not too many. And raise your hands if you believe AI can be trusted to make decisions. There is definitely more on that side. I think the biggest caveat here is it is really about context and the sort of decision being made. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. We are at the end of the day. I hope you've enjoyed the sessions we've had here. We've covered quite a lot of ground, and we've had some really great panelists covering that ground with us. I started off with a panel earlier today where we sort of looked at the leaders within this data space and what's going to separate those leaders from the laggards. And what we saw, there's a few sort of unique Australian contexts here. One is that we are going a little bit slower, some other markets, taking a little bit more of a conservative approach for it as we sort of test and experiment. And that testing and experimenting is likely to take a sort of at least a year before we really sort of start implementing it at scale and at pace. And maybe that's a wise thing for us to do, to sort of make sure that we've got the checks and balances and the guardrails in place before we start ploughing ahead a little bit faster and a little bit further. Liz had some great discussions around sort of ethical AI and sort of the things we need to think about in terms of the ethics on AI. We've had some good debates around whether AI can be, as we've just had, AI can be trusted to make decisions, whether there is an AI problem, a generative AI problem around content as well that we need to be wary of. And I do think about Meta, I think only a couple of days ago, sort of said that they're not going to allow generative AI for political advertising for the presidential election, or at least starting at the primaries in January coming up. That will be an interesting experiment to see how that works. Can industry self-regulate like that? Will it work or not? I suspect it's not going far enough. But we are in a positive world. I think we're experimenting. The tech leaders that we have here are doing a very good job of sort of juggling those competing priorities, which I talked about right at the very start around these sort of economic challenges and headwinds that we're faced at the moment and the technological opportunities that we're going through at the moment. What I think, and these conversations are always super exciting, is that if we have this conversation again in a year's time, I think it's going to be quite different. We're certainly going to be getting more real-life applications of AI, or certainly generative AI, out there. And it's going to raise lots more challenges as well, which potentially we're not aware of yet anyway. So ongoing, interesting discussion. Thank you for being a part of it. Big thank you to IBM for making this possible as well. As I said, this is the last stop in this global roadshow that we've had with this event. I really hope they get to bring it back to Sydney next time, or even Melbourne next time. I know some of you came up from Melbourne for this event, as I did as well. But I appreciate you taking the time. Again, thank you to all of my panelists, and thank you again for your contributions. Hope to see you next time. Thank you.